Microsoft SharePoint is a powerful platform that helps teams collaborate and manage information effectively. It serves as a centralized hub for storing, organizing, and sharing documents, data, and resources within an organization. And SharePoint enables seamless teamwork by offering features like document libraries, lists, workflows, and customizable sites, making it easy to create intranets, extranets, and collaborative websites. It enhances productivity, version control, and security while fostering collaboration among team members, making it an essential tool for modern businesses to streamline their work processes and information management. Hi, I'm Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I've been using Microsoft SharePoint for over 10 years. In this course, we're going to explore how to really get up and running when working with SharePoint. This course is aimed at people who are beginners who maybe have never used SharePoint before, or maybe you've had a little play around with it and you'd like to understand some of the intricacies of the application in a bit more detail. And we have 8 sections crammed full of SharePoint tips and tricks to really get you on your way. We're going to start out in section 1 with a brief course introduction. We'll then really get started with SharePoint Online. So we'll make sure that we're comfortable with the interface and all of the moving parts of the application. In section 3, we'll spend some time talking about SharePoint lists, and in section 4, we're going to explore SharePoint document libraries. Section 5 is all about how SharePoint integrates with other Microsoft 365 applications. And in section 6, we're going to take a look at how we can streamline our processes by incorporating workflows. In section 7, we're going to talk about SharePoint sites, and in section 8, we're simply going to close out the course. Now, this course contains 39 video-led demonstrations. And when it comes to course files, because this is an application that's entirely online, there aren't any downloadable course files per se, because you're going to be working completely within your SharePoint Online account. So all you really need for this course is to make sure that you do have a Microsoft 365 account that has access to SharePoint Online. Now, at the end of each section, there is an exercise. And the exercise is conducted in the form of a video. I'll give you some instruction based on what you've just learnt, and then you'll have an opportunity to view my solution. And of course, we also have end of section quizzes so you can really test your knowledge. So without further ado, it's time to fire up the Microsoft 365 browser and get started learning SharePoint Online. It's important to understand how SharePoint permissions work before we get started. When a company is thinking about implementing SharePoint Online, it more often than not stems from a need to create a centralized company or team intranet site to house important information, store documents, and communicate effectively. SharePoint's collaboration capabilities are hugely attractive to managers looking for a complete solution when it comes to managing content. However, for you and I as end users, the very best thing about using SharePoint Online is its deep integration with other Microsoft 365 applications that we use daily. Every version of SharePoint works well with Office. So we're talking about applications like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, and OneNote. Amongst other things, we can store our Office files in a SharePoint document library and work with them online or offline. Now, it might be that when we're working with maybe mission-critical documents within SharePoint Online, we need to ensure that those documents are secure and only the people who need to view and edit them can. So in every SharePoint site, there are 3 permission levels. The first one is site visitors. Now, site visitors can see the site, they can see the data, but they can't add or edit anything. The next level up is site members. Site members can contribute, edit, and delete documents. They can also do light customization to the design of the site. And then finally, right at the top of the tree, we have site owners. It's worth noting that if you create a SharePoint site from scratch, then you will automatically be the site owner. However, we do recommend that you have at least 2 site owners per site. And site owners can pretty much do everything. They're the only ones that can delete the site if they need to. and they'll be the ones making all the high-level decisions as to what gets added to the site and the direction the site takes. Now, whilst these are the default 3 permission levels, these can also be customized, and we will take a little bit of a look at that a bit later on in the course. Now, outside of these 3 permission groups, nothing can be seen or changed on a SharePoint site by anybody else. So somebody who's not a member of the site can't work on the site at all. Now, due to differing permission levels amongst end users, it might be that I search for a document in SharePoint, but because I don't have permission to access it, I can't find it. However, my colleague Sarah down the hall might run exactly the same search and be able to see that document. It all depends on those permission levels. And site permissions can also vary from site to site. So you might be a site owner for one site where you can pretty much see and do anything, but you might be a visitor on another site where your capabilities are more limited. So let's talk about browsers. To use SharePoint Online effectively, you'll need to use one of the recommended browsers. And those are Internet Explorer 10 or 11, Microsoft Edge, the latest version of Google Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. And just for the record, throughout the balance of this course, I'm going to be using Microsoft Edge. The final thing to note in this lesson is that SharePoint Online is a cloud-based product. And one advantage of this is that you're always working in the most recent version, as updates are pushed out as they occur. Gone are the days where we need to install updates manually or upgrade our software frequently. But due to the frequency of updates and the sheer amount of changes that Microsoft make to their products, there is a good chance that some things I show you in this course will look slightly different when you come to work through the course. So I'm recording this course at a particular moment in time, August 2023. So if you come to this course in a month, 3 months, or maybe even a year, you might find that new functionality has been added, buttons have been moved, and pages look different. So my recommendation to you is that you go into this course, and any cloud-based course for that matter that changes frequently, with an open mind and a willingness to be a bit curious and resilient if things have changed. It's time now to do exercise 1. And in this exercise, we're just going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. And this section was simply the introduction. So this isn't really an exercise, I just want you to check a few things before you begin. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just to make sure that you have a working Microsoft 365 account that has access to SharePoint Online. We're definitely going to need that if we want to complete this course. And I'd like you to be able to explain the difference between the 3 permission level groups in SharePoint. And then finally, I'd like you to ensure you are using an approved browser to access SharePoint Online. Now, as I said, there isn't really an answer to this particular exercise. If you get stuck on the final 2 points here, then I would encourage you to go back and review Lesson 102. You're going to find all of the answers in there. That's it for now, and I will see you in the next section. Subscription that includes SharePoint Online. So before you proceed, you might want to check that you do have one of those subscriptions. Now, the most obvious way to access SharePoint Online is to simply do it from the Microsoft 365 portal. So I've just opened up an Edge web browser and I'm going to type in office.com. Let's hit enter. Now, if you've signed in before to Microsoft 365, it will take you straight into your homepage, or the portal as we call it. If you haven't signed in before, then you will be prompted to enter in your email address and your password that's assigned to your Microsoft 365 account. And that will take you to this start page. Now, once you're at this start page, you can then click on the app launcher in the top left-hand corner. It's this little icon that looks like a waffle, and that's going to open up all of the applications that you have access to within your Microsoft 365 subscription. And one of those should be SharePoint. There it is, just there. We can click It's going to open up in a brand new tab and take us to the SharePoint start page. Now, one thing I would recommend you do is if you're going to be in and out of SharePoint all the time, I would bookmark this page as a favorite in my browser to make it super easy. So let's do that. I'm going to go over to where we have the little star just here. Now, this process will be different depending on what type of browser you're using, but I think most of us are used to bookmarking web pages by now. So I'm going to click on the star. I'm going to call this SharePoint. Let's call it SharePoint homepage. And then I can choose where I want to save this. I'm going to add this to my favorites bar. Let's click on done. And now whenever I open a new browser, and I can use the keyboard shortcut Control-Shift-O to open up my favorites. And right at the bottom here, there is SharePoint homepage. Now I could reorganize this list so it's a bit closer to the top, but for the time being, we'll just click on it and it's going to jump us directly to where we need to be. So that is a nice quick way of getting to SharePoint easily. Now it's also worth noting that you can access SharePoint sites in a couple of other different ways. You can access them through other Microsoft 365 applications. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to click the app launcher one more time and we're going to open up Outlook. Now, one thing that you may not have used before or even noticed are Microsoft 365 groups. So you can see here right at the bottom of my email list, I have groups, and currently I have access to one group, the HR team. Now, we're going to discuss this in more detail a bit later on, but just know that when you create a Microsoft 365 group, it automatically creates a SharePoint site associated with that group. So this particular group has 5 members. If I click, I can see who those members are. So these are all members of the HR team. And what I could do is click the 3 dots, and in here we have Site. And if I click this, it will jump me across to the corresponding SharePoint site for that particular group. And because this is a brand new site, it's popping up all of the helpful information for start designing your site and also next steps. But that effectively is a site already created for us simply by creating a Microsoft 365 group. Something similar happens when you create a community in Yammer. That will also create a SharePoint site that you can access through Yammer. So just bear that in mind. As I said, we will discuss that in a bit more detail later. But for the time being, I want you to just log in to Microsoft 365, open up SharePoint, and get yourself to this start page, ready to move forward to the next lesson. How to navigate. So if we start all the way over on the left-hand side, you can see that we have a vertical menu of different icons. Now this will just take you through to different parts of SharePoint. So this really is your main navigation. At the top here, we have a home icon. This is always going to take you back to this page just here, this SharePoint start page. We then have My Sites, My News, My Files, and My Lists. Then right at the bottom, we have a little create button just here. So this is going to allow us to create different pieces of content directly from within this vertical menu. So we can create things like news posts, pages, brand new sites. We can even create Word documents, spreadsheets, presentations, notebooks, and lists from here as well, all without leaving SharePoint. And of course, we will be looking at this vertical menu in a bit more detail later on. Now, next to the vertical menu, you're going to see following, recent, save for later, and featured links. Now, you might be looking at your SharePoint site thinking, well, mine looks nothing like this. And that very well may be the case. If this is the first time that you're accessing SharePoint online, then you're not really going to see anything on this start page. I can see things like news, I can see sites and other things because I've been using SharePoint online for a while, and my homepage, my start page, has updated accordingly. So don't worry too much if you can't see anything at the moment. All you really need to know here is that underneath this following section, this is where we can effectively follow different sites that we're interested in. Now, it's worth noting that if you create a brand new site from scratch, and we can do that using the link just above, then that site will automatically be added to your followed list. For other sites, you have to elect to follow them. For example, if we scroll down this main page and go down to where I have frequent sites, these are some sites that I've accessed recently. So let's say that I want to start following the Friday Lunch Club site. All I need to do here is click the star, and I'm now following that site. And if I scroll up again to my following section on the left-hand side, you can see there is Friday Lunch Club. So this kind of acts like a favorites area in a way, and enables us to follow and access sites that we find interesting quickly. Underneath the following area, we have recent sections, pretty much what it says on the tin. It's going to give us quick ways to access sites that we've been into recently. We then have a saved for later area. So this is where we can effectively bookmark sites to read later. And you'll notice that if we go to this site just here, Microsoft News Center, you can see we have a little bookmark icon. If I click that, it's going to put it down into this saved for later area. Click it again to remove the bookmark. So really, this whole left-hand side pane is just giving us quick ways to access sites that we find interesting. Now in the middle here, where we have news from sites, this is kind of an aggregation. This is going to change depending on what's going on in the sites that you follow. So if you follow quite a few different sites, you're going to basically get a news feed from each of those sites on your start page. And you can dive in and out of any news item that interests you. But just be aware that this is going to change depending on what's happening in those sites. Now, a couple of other things to point out. Notice running across the top, we have search. So this is where we can go if we need to search for files, people, other types of content in SharePoint. And again, we're going to talk more about search a bit later on. And then all the way over on the right-hand side, we have a cog icon. This is going to jump us into our settings. So from settings, we can do things like add a page, add an app, we can take a look at the site contents, or we can check out our site settings. And I would highly recommend that you do come into here. A lot of your settings are default settings, which might be completely fine for you. But if you need to get a little bit more granular, this is where you're going to find all of your different site settings. Now, going through each one of these is outside the scope of this course. We're going to use the defaults, but I do encourage you to have a look through here in your own time. Now, this is probably a good point to mention. If you do find yourself on a page like this and you simply want to get back to your start page, you can always simply click on the SharePoint logo in the top left-hand corner. Let's click on this and we'll find ourselves back at start. Now, just briefly before we finish up this lesson, we're going to jump into a site. So let's take a look at our frequent sites. I think we're just going to jump into Mark a Project Team. We can click to jump to that site. Now, currently this site is pretty empty. This is basically the template you see when you first create a site. So this is kind of waiting for me to start customizing it and adding things like news items, quick links, and documents to my document library. But before we start doing all of that, let's again just make sure we're comfortable with what we can see here. So within each site in SharePoint, we're going to get another left-hand navigation menu. Currently, we're clicked on the home page. This is the home page of our website, but we have other links in here that will link us out to other Microsoft 365 applications. For example, conversations. If we click on conversations, this is going to jump us across to the Microsoft 365 group for this particular SharePoint site. If we click on documents, it's going to take us to the SharePoint document library for this site. And you can see that we already have some folders in here which contain files. We can also access a team notebook that is related to this site as well. We can see the pages that make up our site. We can see our content list as well. Now, a lot of these things that you see in this menu are standard, but some of these have been customized. And notice that we have an edit button at the bottom, and when we click this, it will basically allow us to move these around by dragging and dropping them. And we can also create our own links within this navigation. So we might want to link to other pages within this SharePoint site, or maybe external websites. And once again, we're going to cover all of this when we look at customization. Remember, we just need to click on Home to jump us back to the home page for this site. So try not to get confused between the home page for a site and the SharePoint start page, which shows us all of our sites. But in terms of navigation, that is pretty much it. I will see you in the next lesson. If people want to see a bit more information about you, then your profile is where they're going to go. Now, to access your profile, if you cast your eyes all the way over to the top right-hand corner, you should notice your photo. Now, if you haven't added a photo yet, then you're just going to have your initials up here. But if we click on the photo, we can access our profile by clicking on My Microsoft 365 Profile. Now, when we jump into our profile, it's going to open up another Microsoft 365 application called Delve. And we can use Delve for a few different things. This is where we can come to update our profile, but it also provides us with an interface where we can organize our documents as well as our email attachments. So basically just here, you can see my recent activity. So you can see that I've done a lot of modifications to a specific SharePoint team site. If we scroll down a bit further, I can also see people that I've been working with across Microsoft 365. And this would be accurate because I've just added all of these people into a SharePoint team site. Now, the other half of the screen is all related to your profile. So you can jazz this up a little bit and make this look a little bit nicer for when people click on your profile. Now, notice in the top right hand corner, we can change our cover photo. We have a few template ones in here dividing down into different categories. So we can go for nature, we can go for landscapes. Let's do that. Let's change it to something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then close this down to save. We can also change our profile photo just here as well. So I'm going to do that. Let's click on the camera icon and I'm going to choose to upload a new photo. And this is the photo I'm going to use. Let's click on open. You can adjust it so you can zoom in or zoom out if you want to, and then move it around and get it in the correct position and then click on apply. Now, I will say with this, sometimes it does take a while to filter through and update, but you should find that if you refresh the page, it should have changed in the top right-hand corner, which I can see that it has. Now, if we want to make any further changes to our profile, we can click on the Update Profile button, and we can work our way through these different sections, adding data where relevant. Just bear in mind as you're doing this that anybody who clicks on your profile can see this information. I've got my email address over here. I've got my phone number. If I go to the About Me section, this is where I can add in a few words about myself. Don't forget to click on the Save button to save your changes. We can also add things like projects that we've worked on in the past. So I can click in here and I can add a project title. And then all I need to do is click on Add Project to add that in. So you can really go through and build up a list so that people who are viewing your profile can see the types of project that you've worked on previously. If you want to remove anything, you can simply click on the cross. If I click in Add Skills, I'm going to say that Excel is one of my skills. Let's press Enter. Word is another one. PowerPoint is another one, so on and so forth. And you can also ask me about running. That's one of my hobbies. And also yoga. Scrolling down, we can add in our schools and education, and I will say that none of these are mandatory. You don't have to add this in. And we can also add some information about our interests and hobbies at the bottom. So you can really add as much or as little information as you like. And if you want to see somebody else's profile information, all you ever have to do at any given moment in time is simply click on them. So we can do that from within Delve. I can click on Adele and I can then view her profile, but we can basically click on anybody's name, no matter where we are in Microsoft 365, to view their profile. Structure of a SharePoint team site is very similar to the structure of any internet site. So on the screen right now, we just have a little diagram to help explain this. So at the top, we have our tenant. So that is normally our company name. And you can see at the top, I've used an example of a company that's called bargainholidays.com. So that's the company name, and everybody who works at that company will have an email address that ends with bargainholidays.com. And then underneath the tenant, we have the site. So someone might log into SharePoint and create a team site called Travel Handbook. And then within that site, we have various different site pages. So these are effectively web pages. So I might have a site page called Travel Guidelines, another one called Before You Go, another one called During Your Trip, and another one called After You Return. And those pages might have their own pages underneath them. So for example, if I wanted to navigate to the page Travel Guidelines and the subpage Air, the URL would look something like this. So we have our tenant, our company name first, we then have sites and then Travel Handbook, that is the site name, and then site pages, Travel Guidelines, and then finally we get to the page related to air travel. So that is the structure of your SharePoint team sites. So let's take a look at that within the context of SharePoint. Now currently I'm not clicked on any site, so let's change that. Let's click on SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub. So I am now in this specific team site. And if we take a look at the top here, there is my tenant name. We then have sites, and then I have the site name, SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub. And if I click on anything and go to a different page, it's going to add that onto the end of the URL. Now we can see all of these pages and that site structure by clicking on the cog icon and going to Site Contents. Let's click on the link. It's going to jump us across to the contents of this site, and we have all of our different folders. So if we go to Site Pages, this is where you're going to be able to see all of the individual pages. Now notice here that I have two, even though I only have one page on this site currently. And the one page that I have is effectively the home page. So whenever you create a brand new site, you're automatically going to get a home page. If you make any changes to that home page, then you could end up with effectively another version of the home page like I have here. I applied a template to the home page and republished it. Now I don't need both of these here. I could effectively remove the home page because I'm just using this one just here. So if I select it and click on delete, I should find that that doesn't affect anything related to my site, because if you take a look at the URL, this is the page we're actually using, learningteamhome.aspx. Now let's go back to the main start page and go into a different site. Let's go into Mark 8 Project Team. Now you can see here, instead of going up to the cog icon, we actually have access to the site contents in the left-hand navigation menu. So again, if I click on site contents, it's going to take me across to a similar screen where we can see all of the different folders. Now these other folders contain things like any documents we have uploaded, any site assets, images, things like that. Your pages will always live in the site pages folder. And you can see that for this one, I just simply have the home page because I haven't made any changes to it. So as we start adding pages to our site, you're going to see all of those in here. So just be aware of those points. It's really important to understand that structure and how everything ties together. But when we're working on this start screen, we're not in any particular site. Notice we have a search bar running across the top of the screen. Now, if we click our mouse in this search bar, we can pretty much search for anything from here. For example, if I type in the word, let's go for bees, you can see just there it's found a file that I uploaded, a Word document called The Fascinating World of Bees. What about if I type in something a bit more generic? Let's type in sales. Well, you can see what it's found. Well, you can see it's found a few more items. And the way that this search works is that it will categorize your search results depending on where it's found a hit. So you can see below we have sites, files, and people. So it's found 2 SharePoint sites that contain the word sales. So that would be right. We have one called US Sales and another called Sales and Marketing. It's found a Word document that's called Sales South. And it's found Isaiah because he has sales rep as his job title. Now, of course, if we want to jump directly to any of these, we can simply click. So maybe I want to go to the US Sales SharePoint site. I can click on my search result. It's going to open up a new tab, and I'm now working within that site. So nice and simple. What about if I click on Isaiah? What's that going to do? Well, that's going to do a search for Isaiah, and it's going to show me any content that Isaiah has created, and also stuff like his contact information. So there's his contact information. If I click on the organization tab, it's also going to show me other people that work at the organization where he works. I can even see the hierarchy, so I can see that Patty is the president, Miriam is the director, and Isaiah reports directly in to these 2 people. And then underneath that, we have all of Isaiah's colleagues. And if Isaiah had shared any content, we would have that listed underneath the content tab as well. So a really nice way to search. Now let's type in sales one more time, because what we can do is expand our search results. So if we click on show more results at the bottom here, we're going to get a more extensive set of search results. So the first tab is showing everything that it finds related to sales. And remember, this is across all of the sites that we have access to. So I have loads of stuff in here. Now notice that it's not only picking up SharePoint sites, it's picking up things like OneNote notebooks. So you can see here it's showing me that I have a OneNote notebook called Sales Team A. We have some filters at the top here, so if I want to refine these results even more, I can click the file type, and maybe I'm only interested in finding Word documents with the word sales in them. If I click on apply, it's going to narrow those results down and filter out everything that I'm not looking for. Click on the cross to remove the filter. I could even filter by the date last modified. So maybe I'm looking for something that was modified in the past month. I can select that and it's going to show me all of the documents, the site pages, the notebooks that have been modified recently. Once again, click the cross to clear the filter. And then running across the top, this is where we can refine the list down again. So if I'm just interested in files, I could choose files. If I want to see the sites, I can click there. People. It's showing me who works in sales and marketing. I could go to news, no results there because we haven't really uploaded much content as yet. But hopefully you get the idea as to how powerful this search can be. And of course, if you want to refine it further, you might not necessarily want to search across all of your sites. If you jump into any of your sites, you can run your search from there. So let's go into a site. Now, we don't have a great deal of content to search through because this is a site that we've just built. But if I type in general and hit enter, you can see it's actually going to find that I have a general folder in the document library for this site. And if I click on this, it's going to jump me directly there into that general folder where shortly we will have some documents. So the main takeaways from this lesson are that you can search for pretty much anything. You can refine your search results and you can either search across all of your sites or in specific sites only. When we created this site, I actually applied a template. And the template that we currently have applied to this site is a communication site template. Now, we've briefly spoken about communication sites. We are going to talk about them in more detail a bit later on in this section. But for this demonstration, I basically want to switch this back to using a team site template. Now, very simple to apply a different template. We just go up to the cog icon to open up the settings pane, and then we can say apply a site template. And I want to use the team site template. That is this one just here, team collaboration. Let's click on this and let's choose use template. So this is basically the default template when you create a team site if you don't add another template in the setup process. And what you'll notice about this template is that the news section is fairly prominent just here. In general, on the first page of our team sites, it's good to have the latest goings on, the latest news displayed. Of course, you can delete this if you don't want news displayed there. And in general, news is generally what you would have at the top of the first page of your site. Now, notice underneath news, we have an add button. If we click the drop down, we can add a news post or a news link. Now, it's important to differentiate between these two. If we create a news post, we're effectively creating a brand new page, and we need to design that news page. If we create a news link, we're linking to an external news source. Now, we are going to do both of these. We're going to start with news post. Now, notice here we're creating a brand new page. If you think back to the layout, the structure of SharePoint, we have our home page, and now we're creating a page off of that page. We have 3 templates. We can start from a blank. We can use the visual template or the basic text template. Now, we're going to start from a blank. Let's select it and click on Create Post in the bottom corner. So now we're taken into that page and we can start designing it. Now, I will say at this early stage of this course, we're not going to go full force into how to design pages, but I would like to just highlight a few things to get you used to designing your own site pages. So because we've selected a blank template, we don't have any kind of image at the top here. Notice that as I hover my mouse over different parts of this page, we get different things highlighting, and these are what we call web parts. And there are all different kinds of web parts that you can add to your site pages. Again, we'll look at that in detail a bit later on. But for the time being, we're going to edit this header web part. Notice we have a floating menu bar, and one of the options that we have is to browse images. So let's add a nice image to the header area just to jazz this up a little bit. So we can upload a file that we've used recently. We can browse the stock images library and choose an image from there. We can search the web. We can upload from OneDrive. If we have a file stored off locally on our PC, we can upload from there. I'm just going to add an image from the stock image library. So let's go to the technology tab, and I think I'm just going to use this image. Why not? Let's click on Insert. So now I have that image there. I can also change the focal point of the image. Notice we have a Set Image Focal Point option on that floating toolbar. And this is just if I want to move this up or down. So let's take a look at this. I think I'm going to let's put it just there. We also have some layout options for this image. So currently we're looking at this in overlap layout, but I could go for image and title. We get something slightly different. I could go for plain, which removes the image entirely, or I could go for color block. Again, we get something completely different. Now I think I quite like overlap. It's also worth noting that we have an Edit Web Part button just here as well. And when we click on this, it's going to open up a pane on the right-hand side. And in here, you'll find some of the same options. For example, we've got just our layout options just there. But we can also choose how we want this heading text, I should say, aligned. So currently it's aligned to the left. I could choose center to move that into the middle. And I think I'm going to do that. I can also choose to add some text above the title. So maybe I want this to say latest news. Check it out. Looks pretty good. I can also choose to show the publish date. So let's turn that on as well. And then finally at the bottom, we can add some alternative text, which is really helpful for people who are using screen readers. So I highly recommend that you do that. Once you're happy, you can close down this window and we can then go in and add a title. And the title of this page is going to be Latest Excel Updates. And I'm going to add my name into here because I'm the one who's creating this news page. Now, as we're making all of these changes, SharePoint is continuously saving our draft. You can see in the top corner, it says your draft has been saved. And I also have a Save as Draft button in the top left-hand corner as well. So that's an important point to note. Nothing that you're doing here is being published to the live site until you choose to post the news. So I could start working on this page before lunch. I could save it as a draft and then come back and work on it later before finally posting it at the end of the day. So just be aware of that. You need to actually post or publish the page for anyone to see the changes that you've made. Now, again, we're not going to go too far into page design at this stage, but I do just want to add some text so that we have something on this page. Now I'm just going to add some dummy text. We will change this later. Notice underneath I have a text web part. When I click in it, I get this big long formatting floating menu bar. And I'm just going to copy and paste in some text. And of course, once you have your text in, you can then use this formatting bar to make changes to it. So maybe I want to select this section just here and add some bullet points. The same goes for this just here. Let's add some bullet points, so on and so forth. Now let's just say that I'm off for lunch and I want to come back and work on this page before posting it. If I click on Save as Draft, it's going to save. I get a little preview as to what this is going to look like. And if I'm at the home screen here of my team site, you can see underneath Activity, there is my page. Now, I'm the only one who's seeing this. Anybody else who has access to this site won't see it until I choose to post it. So when it comes time to post, I can click on the page to open it up, and now I can click on the Post News button. This time it's going to post it. Let's go back to home, and you can now see what that looks like. If we now go to Pages in the left-hand menu, we should find that we have a new page. There it is, latest Excel updates.aspx. That is the page that we've just created that we can access from the home page. Now, the other way that we can add a news post is directly linking to an external website. So let's just quickly do that. I'm going to go to Add, and this time we're going to choose News Link. And this is a simple case of just copying and pasting in the URL that you want to link to. So I have a link copied to my clipboard, so I simply need to Control V to paste it in. We're just linking to the Microsoft support site. Notice it adds a title and a description for me based on the information on that page. Obviously you can edit all of these. I'm just going to leave them as they are and click on Post, and it's going to post that to the newsfeed, but we're accessing a link this time as opposed to going to. Just a reminder as to the difference between these two. A team site is very much for your team specifically to collaborate and share ideas, whereas a communications site is a site that communicates something to the rest of the organization. So it might be that you work on a project within your team site and then you announce the project via a communications site that everybody in the organization can see. So to create a communications site, we just jump up to the Create Site link, and instead of choosing Team Site, we want a communications site. Now before we click, let's just read the information below, just to make it really clear what a communications site is. So it says a communications site is to share information that engages and informs viewers. We can create portals or subject-specific sites. We can engage dozens or thousands of viewers, and we'll probably have a few content authors and many site visitors. So we're going to choose communications site, and we can now give our site a name. So I'm going to call mine Microsoft 365 Training Schedule. So maybe with this project, we're sorting out what needs to be trained, who needs to be trained within our team site. And then when we're ready, we can publish the full training schedule of who's going to be trained and when. We can give our site a description. Just to save a bit of time, I'm not going to add this in. This is optional, but I do recommend that you do it. The language is English. Let's click on Finish. And that is pretty much as difficult as it gets. We've created our site. We can now start designing it. So once again, we're getting a similar choice. We can browse templates, or we can just start designing from scratch. Now I'm going to close this down this time because this is the default layout of a communications site. And everything you see on here will either link through to a page or an external link. So if I just click on this first big image just here, that's going to link me to an external site. And this actually goes to the Microsoft support page about SharePoint. And because this is a template, you'll find that pretty much all of these go to external links as opposed to news pages. And everything you see on here is customizable. And we're going to talk a lot about design when we get to that section of this course. But just so you know, if we look in the top right hand corner, notice we have an edit link just here. If we edit, that's going to allow us to edit this page. We're now in edit mode, and we can see the different web parts, and we can make various different changes. Now note here, when I click on this first web part, this first image, check out the floating toolbar. We have a lot more things on this than we did when we were looking at the last page. So we can edit the web part, we can duplicate the web part, we can delete it. We can choose if we want it to show in tiles or in layers. I think I like tiles a little bit better. And we can also customize how many tiles we want in this section. So currently I have 5 tiles showing. That's why we have these 5 images. But I could go for 3 instead, or maybe I just want 2, or maybe I only want 1. So all of this is entirely up to you. And remember, when you're clicked up here, you are simply editing this one web part. If I wanted to edit something else down the page, for example, this news area a bit further down, I would need to click in this area, and then I get a floating toolbar related to the formatting of this section of the page. Now, something else worth noting ahead of the lessons on design, not only do we have this little floating toolbar when we click on a web part, we also have a little floating toolbar down the side of each section. So the page is divided into sections, and you'll see these little plus symbols as you scroll down the page. So this is where you can come if you want to add an entirely new section and fill it with some other information. We can edit the section, we can move sections around, we can duplicate sections and also delete them. So just bear that in mind when we get to the section on design. But in terms of creating a communication site, that's pretty much it. It's then down to you to customize how you want it to look. I'm going to click on the Republish button in the top corner to publish the changes that I've made. And then if we click back on Home to take us to the SharePoint Start page, you'll now see at the top in the following section, because I created the communications side, it's added it straight into following, which makes it super easy for me to get back to the page. It's time now to do exercise 2. And in exercise 2, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learnt in this section of the course. And this section was about getting started with SharePoint. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just simply open SharePoint online and make sure that you're logged in. And I'd like you to ensure that you're familiar with the interface so you know where everything is. I'd like you to think about updating your profile. So consider updating your information or maybe even adding in a photo. Once you've done that, I'd like you to create a new team site and I'd like you to call it Contoso Travel. Once you have that site created, I'd like you to add 2 news posts and I'd like you to add news post links. And for this, I'd just like you to select 2 travel websites that you're familiar with to use as the links in the news area. That's it for this exercise. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do was to make sure that you're logged into your Microsoft 365 account. So to do that, you can simply go to office.com and then type in your email address and password to log in. If you've logged in previously, it will recognize you like mine has just here. So all I need to do is click on sign in. Now, once we're at the Microsoft 365 start page, to open SharePoint, we click on the app launcher in the top corner and we can choose SharePoint from the list. And the first thing I asked you to do here was just to make sure that you're familiar with the interface. So make sure you know where to go to search. You can see we have a search bar in the top. Make sure you understand what these different areas are on the left-hand side. For example, following, recent, saved for later. Make sure you know where you can go to access your settings. So by clicking on the cog icon in the top right-hand corner. And then make sure you understand what you can see in the main portion of this screen. I then asked you to consider updating your profile. And that's a very simple task to do. All we need to do is click on our profile in the top right-hand corner and go to My Microsoft 365 Profile. This is going to jump us into Microsoft Delve, and from here we can click the Update Profile button, and that's going to allow us to modify any piece of information we like. And also, if we want to change our photo, we can simply click on the camera icon just here to upload a brand new photo. The next thing I asked you to do was to create a new team site called Contoso Travel. So from the SharePoint start page, we're going to click on the Create Site button. We're going to create a team site and we're going to call it Contoso Travel. Now, I didn't ask you to modify any other settings. I didn't specify if this should be a private or a public site. So I don't really mind what you selected down here. As long as you've got your site named, let's click on Next. Now, depending on where you're doing this, if you're doing this at your organization, your colleagues might be fine for you to start adding them so you can practice. If not, you don't actually have to add any members if you don't want to. You can simply click on Finish. Now, I'm going to add just a couple. Let's add Adele, and I'm going to add Lee. And click Finish. So SharePoint's going to go away and it's going to create my brand new site. Let's close down some of these pop-ups. There we go. The final part of this exercise was to add 2 news posts. And I said that I didn't mind which websites you used. Just make sure they're sort of travel related to keep within the theme of the site that we're creating. So let's click the drop down underneath News and we're going to add a news link. Notice the link pane opens up on the right hand side and I have a link copied to the clipboard. I'm going to Control V to paste that in. It's going to go away, grab the page information. We could change the image if we wanted to. I'm just going to post these as is. And then we're going to add another one, another news link. I have another link pasted to the clipboard. It's going to grab the information and we're going to choose Post. And that was all I needed you to do for this exercise. I'll see you in the next section. So now that we've nailed some of the basics of working in SharePoint, it's time to move on to talking about lists. Because lists are a fundamental part of working in SharePoint. Now, I think on the face of it, most of us are familiar with what a list is, but let's just quickly take a look at it in the context of SharePoint. And to do this, I'm actually going to flip across to Excel because I feel it's a little bit easier to understand. So I have this workbook. It's called Employee Skill Levels, and what you can see in this workbook on this particular worksheet is basically just a list, but in Excel. So a list generally has a table structure where we have column headings at the top, and then we have various different rows or records. And in this case, each record is related to one employee. So this is a list of all of the employees, and we have 100 or so records in here. We can see the date that they were hired, the department they're in, their job title, their location, their extension number, their skill level in terms of Microsoft Office, and if they are a manager or not. So you will find that you will have lists and tables like this scattered across not just Excel, but many other applications. You might have another list in Word, for example. Now, we can store this type of list information in SharePoint. Now, if I wanted to store this list information in SharePoint, there are a couple of different ways that I could do it. The first method is I could upload the entire Excel file. But what that means is that when somebody wants to view this list, they can open the file from within the SharePoint document library, but the list still exists in Excel as opposed to SharePoint. So let's take a look at that example first. So I'm back in SharePoint now. I'm going to open up my Microsoft 365 Training Hub page, and I'm going to upload that Excel document into the document library for this team site. So if we scroll down, here is my document library. Now, if when you're working with the document library, you find this little window down here a little bit too small, because this is effectively just a web part on this start page, you can simply create a link to the full document library so it opens up in the full screen and add it into the navigation. So let me just very quickly show you how to do that. We're going to jump up to the cog to jump into settings, and we're going to go back to site contents. Now, once we're in here, if we click on documents, this is basically our document library page. So you can see that is a much bigger version of that smaller web part. Now, I want to be able to get to here quickly because I find the larger version easier to work with. So what we can do once we've navigated here is we can copy the URL, Control C, and then we can simply edit the navigation menu by clicking the edit button. And if we hover our mouse at the bottom of the last menu item, you can see here it says add a link or label to the navigation. So we're going to add a link, and then we're going to paste in the address, Control V, and you can choose if you want it to open in a new tab or not. So I'm going to say yes, open in a new tab, and the display text is going to be Document Library. Click on OK and click on Save. So now if we're on our home page and we want to upload something into the document library, we can simply click on the link and it's going to open in a new tab in that full page view. So now that we're in here, I'm going to open up the general folder and I'm going to upload that Excel file that I have saved off to my PC. And you'll find this file in the course files folder. It's called employee skill levels.xlsx. Let's click on open to upload that into the document library. So that list effectively now exists in SharePoint. If we go back to the home page, if I need to see that list, I can go down to my documents web part, I can click on general, and I can click on employee skills level. It's going to open the Excel spreadsheet in a brand new tab, and then we can work on it. Now that's a perfectly valid method, but you can also create lists natively within SharePoint and add lots of different types of functionality to them. So when people want to edit them, they don't have to come out to Excel to do that. They can do it from within SharePoint. And if we go back to the main home screen of our SharePoint site and click the new drop down, you can see the first item that we have is list. And that's how we're going to continue in the next lesson. In the previous lesson, we explored what lists are, and we took a look at a list in Microsoft Excel. Now, we ended that lesson by highlighting the fact that you can create lists that are native to SharePoint as opposed to just uploading the Excel document that contains the list. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a native SharePoint list and import that data from the Excel file. So we're back in our Microsoft 365 Training Hub team site, and notice at the top here we have a new drop-down. Now, if we click this drop-down, we can create various different things within our team site. And the first one in the list is List. So let's click to open that up. Now, you'll see in here that there are 4 different ways that you can create a native SharePoint list. We can create a blank list from scratch. We can create a list based off of a list that already exists in any SharePoint site. We can create a list from Excel, or we could choose a template from below. Now, in this lesson, we're going to import our Excel data. So I'm sure you can tell which option we're going to select. It's this one here from Excel. Now, this is just a simple case of either uploading the file, or if you do have the file stored in your SharePoint document library, you can navigate to the folder that you saved it into. Now, we did upload that to the General folder. So let's click on General. There it is. All I need to do is select the file and then click on Next at the bottom. Now, the next thing to check here are the data types at the top. So each column contains data, and we just need to make sure that we have the correct data type selected for that column. Now, for this first column, it's showing as title. You'll find that generally the first column will always show as title. That is fine. We could change this to single line of text. That accurately describes the type of data we have in this column as well. Now, notice the hire date column, we have some random numbers. Now, these aren't really as random as they seem. If you're fairly familiar with Excel, you'll know that dates are simply numbers in Excel that have been formatted. And the number that you see is basically the number of days past the 1st of the 1st, 1900. Now, as this data has been imported into SharePoint, it's lost that date formatting, so we're just seeing the number. Now, if we click the drop down, we do have a date and time data type in here. Now, if we switch it to date and time, the date looks fine, but we're also getting a random time in here as well. Now, I don't want to include the time, I just want the date. Now, there's no way to do that from this area just here. We're going to have to deal with that afterwards. So we're going to leave it like this for the time being, and I'll show you how to remove the time in a moment. Now, the rest of these I think are all pretty good. So we have single line of text for all of these. That's correct. Number for extension number is fine. Single line of text, single line of text. I'm happy with that. Let's click on Next. Now we get the opportunity to name our list. I'm going to keep it on employee skill levels, but I'm going to add on the front here that it is a list, so it's easy for me to identify. As always, I would recommend adding a description. I'm not going to save a bit of time, and I am going to add this list into my main site navigation on the left-hand side to make it quicker to access. Let's click on Create. So SharePoint is going to go away, it's going to import that list information, and the screen will refresh, and we should now see that list in the left-hand menu. There it is. And our list now exists natively within SharePoint as opposed to in an external Excel file. So now that we have this list in SharePoint, let's deal with this hire date column. If we click the drop-down next to hire date, go to Column Settings and Edit, this is going to open up a pane on the right hand side. Now, the type in here is date and time, but we also get a little toggle slider which allows us to define if we want to include the time or not. So currently mine is set to yes, so I'm just going to slide this to no and click on Save. The screen will refresh, and now we just get those dates. Now, another question that always comes up is that people always want to know how to change the format of these dates. At the moment, we have it in a longer format, July the 5th, 2011. Maybe you just want it to say 7/5/11. Now, this is where we get into custom columns, and we're going to be covering that later on in the course. So we will revisit this. For the time being, we're just going to leave it as it is. Now, let's scroll across and see if there's anything else we need to do in these columns. Now, look at this, extension number. The data type for this column was number, and so it's added a comma as if it's an actual number as opposed to an extension number. Again, we can change this by clicking the drop down, going to column settings and edit. So I'm going to keep this on number, that's fine. Number of decimal places, well, I'm going to put that down to 0, just so it doesn't cause us an issue further down the line. And if we expand more options, notice that I have a little slider for thousand separator. So I'm going to turn this off. Let's click on Save. And we should find that the page refreshes and these now look more like extension numbers as opposed to actual numbers. So my list is looking pretty good. A couple of other points to note at this stage. I'm going to select, and I can choose any column here. Let's click the drop down. I'm going to go to column settings and let's go to format this column. Now, if we go to format view, we've got a couple of options we can change in here. Now, for example, we can change the layout. So we have our list in a very traditional layout at the moment. But if we wanted to, we could choose to display our list items as a gallery. So now each employee is represented as a card. And then underneath we have a card designer. So we can say edit card and we can make various different changes just here. So we can basically choose what information we want to display on each card. Now I'm going to keep mine as a list. And you could make this look very similar to an Excel table by applying banded rows. So that's this option here, alternating row styles. Let's choose it. I get that nice grey banding, which makes my data a lot easier to read. And if I don't like the grey, I can edit the row styles and I can choose a colour for odd rows and even rows. So if we click the format button, maybe I want these in a nice yellow colour. And maybe I want my even rows in a green colour. Now, I don't actually like that very much. Let's just put that back to automatic. And I think I'm going to set this back to grey. But just know that you can change it from there. Click on Save to save your changes. So that's pretty much it. That's how you can import a list into SharePoint from an Excel document and how you can make some basic formatting changes. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can create a list in SharePoint by importing a list from Excel. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can create a list from scratch natively within SharePoint and how you can customize the columns and create things like drop-down lists to make data entry really simple. So from the new drop-down, we're going to go to List again, but this time we're going to choose Blank List. Now, the first thing we need to do is decide on a name for our list. So just to stick with our naming convention, I'm going to make sure it says list at the start. And this is going to be a list of staff members and what applications they've been trained on. So I'm going to call this the completed training list. Once again, I highly recommend you add a description. I'm not going to save a bit of time. And I am going to show this list in the site navigation. Let's click on Create. Now with this type of list, there's nothing to import, so we're just going to get the basic skeleton of a blank list. And that basic skeleton is just effectively one column with the option to add more columns. So by default, the one column that you get is going to be called title. But if we click the drop down and go to column settings, we can rename this. So I want this first column to be called employee name. Let's click on Save. Now, if we just go back in here again and go to column settings and format this column, now I can go in and add more columns. Now, if I click on add column, notice we get a choice of the type of column that we want to create. Now, some of these are very obvious. Maybe we want to create a column where people just type in text. Maybe they're going to add a number. Maybe they're going to add in currency or locations. But we do have some other really interesting things in here, such as choice. And that's what we're going to use for this column. Because basically what I want to happen here is I want to be able to select a Microsoft application from a list as opposed to typing it in. Because when you're making selections from a list, it means that you're going to enter it correctly each and every time. So if you're the administrator and you're the one creating this list, it's always good to make your lists as error-free as possible. If people can type in whatever they like and somebody makes a spelling mistake, that's going to make your results inaccurate, particularly if you want to start doing things like filtering your list or searching. So let's choose choice and click on next. So now we get our create a column pane pop out on the right hand side. So the name field is basically the name of the column. So I want this to say application. Again, you could add a description. I'm not going to. The type is choice, and now we can enter in the different choices. So choice 1 is going to be Excel. Choice 2 is going to be Word. Choice 3, that's going to be PowerPoint, and we can add more choices simply by clicking the Add Choice button. Let's add Outlook. Let's add, what else should we add? OneNote. And let's also add SharePoint. Why not? Now notice that as I'm adding these, they kind of have this background fill color. And of course you can change this. If you notice to the right hand side, we have a little color palette. When we click, we can change the color of our drop down lists. So let's use this second row of colors. So we'll go blue, we'll go purpley color. We'll just go through so that these look quite nice next to each other, like so. And of course, if you want to remove any of your choices once you've added them, you can click on the cross, and you can also reorder things by dragging and dropping using this little waffle icon just here. So if I grab SharePoint, I can move it up one, grab it again to move it down one. Now, I don't want people to be able to add their own values manually. I want to have this list so that they have to select something from the drop down as opposed to typing their own choice in. So I'm not going to select this checkbox just here. Now, the default value is what do I want it to display when they haven't yet made a choice. Now, I don't want it to display anything, so I'm going to keep it on none. Now, we do have some more options down here related to how we want to display these choices. So we can choose to have drop-down menus, or we can choose radio buttons. Now, I want a nice drop-down menu, so I'm going to keep it on that. Can they select multiple? Well, yes, I'm going to let them, because these employees need to be trained on multiple applications. So instead of having their name repeated for each application, I just want to be able to add all of the applications in one record. So let's say yes, we're going to allow multiple selections. Require that this column contains information. Well, no, they don't necessarily have to have something in the column to be able to save, and that's all I'm going to change in there. Let's click on Save at the bottom. So now we have 2 columns. That's all I'm going to add at the moment. So if somebody else who is part of this team comes in and they want to start adding people to this list, all they need to do is click on Edit in Grid View, and they can add the employee name. Now I'm just going to add my name for argument's sake. This is just a free text field. I can press Tab, but when I click in the application field, I get that drop-down list. So I can now choose the applications that I've been trained on. And because I selected multiple, I can choose Excel, let's say Outlook, and SharePoint, and click on the tick. I can then add a new item and add the next person. And this time we're just going to select PowerPoint and click on the tick. And I could carry on going. Once I'm happy with my items, I can exit the grid view, and there we go. Now for this, I'm going to widen this column out simply by dragging it so that these are all on one line, because I think that looks a little bit neater. Let's add one more column so that you kind of get the hang of this. Let's click Add Column again, and this time I'm going to add a yes/no column type. Let's click on Next. Because what I want to show in this column is if they've completed all of their training. So the name of this column is going to be completed, the type is yes/no, and we'll have the default value as yes. Again, if we expand more options, we can see other things that we can do. So require that this column contains information. So I'm going to say yes, that is required. Let's click on Save. So now check out what happens. Because I haven't added anything in here, it's flagging that this is required information. So I'm going to go into Edit in Grid View. Let's go to Completed, and it gives me a little checkbox. So I can say, yes, this has been completed. Exit Grid View, and there we go. Now, if you don't like this required info in there, you would just go back in to the column settings, expand more options, and turn off this little checkbox and click on Save. So instead of that yellow flag, you're just going to have nothing in there. So this is a really good way to build fully functional lists from within. So far in this section, we've taken a look at 2 different ways to create lists in SharePoint. And now we're going to take a look at the last 2 options. So let's go into New, let's select List, because there are 2 in here that we haven't yet spoken about. From Existing List and also from a template. Now let's deal with From Existing List first of all, because this is going to be very, very quick. When we click on from an existing list, what we're basically going to get here is a list of all of the SharePoint sites that we have access to, and we can choose to create a list based off of an existing list. So for example, I'm clicked on the SharePoint team site that we're currently working on, and you can see the two lists that I've created so far. But if I click on some of these other sites, and I think most of these don't have any lists. Let's go to Mark 8 project team. I can see that here we have a content list and a service desk list. So I could choose to create a new list in this site based off of a list in another site. So if we select content list and click on next, it's going to ask us to give our list a name. I'm going to leave this on content list, but I am going to add list onto the front. Let's show it in site navigation, click on create, and it's basically going to import the template of that list. So we're not going to get the content, but we are going to get all of these customized headings. And we can then edit in grid view and start to add our list items. So just be aware of that, really nice and straightforward. Now let's go back to home and let's take a look at creating a list from a template. Once again, we're going to go to new and list. And in this section at the bottom, we can choose a template to create a list from. Now, once again, it is worth noting that if we choose, let's go for issue tracker, for example, we get the template loaded up into the preview window so we can kind of see what that looks like. But a lot of people think that when they choose this template, they're going to get all of the data as well. Now, you don't actually get the data, you don't get the records. This is really just a template for these column headings again. It will also bring across things like the drop-down menus as well, so you don't have to go in and create those. Of course, you can modify everything that you see on this template, but it does give you a little bit of a head start if this is the type of list that you want to create. So this is an issue tracker list. This would work pretty well with the content that we have. So I'm going to say, yes, let's use this template. I'm going to leave it as issue tracker, but we're going to call it list on the front here and click on create. So now we can go in and add some information. So let's just say Word crashing, issue description. Word keeps crashing whenever I save a long document. Now, when I click in the priority field, notice I get a drop down with some choices. So this is what I mean. This has been pre-populated into the template. So I could say that this is a high priority problem. If I click in status, again, I have some choices in here. So let's say that this is in progress. I can assign this to someone. So let's just type in someone's name. I'm going to go for Adele. Date reported. We have a calendar icon. Again, this is pre-populated. We're going to say it was reported today. Issue source, this has been set up as a link field, so we can add in some links in here. Maybe if we have a link to the actual document that's crashing, we could add in the OneDrive link, the SharePoint link, and then display some alternative text. Now, we're not going to do that. Let's scroll across. You can see this pretty much is fairly standard. This one's been set up as an image field, so when we click on it, we can add an image if that's going to help, so on and so forth. So that's basically how a template works. It's basically just the column headings are already pre-populated along with some of those drop-down menus and other data types. Let's exit out of grid view, and that is it. We now have 4 lists in our navigation. When working with lists in SharePoint, we have some tools at our disposal that are going to help us organize our list information. And those tools would be sort, filter, and group. So I'm currently clicked on the employee skill levels list, and we can see all of our lovely information in here. Now, currently, this list isn't sorted in any particular order. If you take a look at the first column, for example, these aren't in alphabetical order. And the same goes for any of these other columns. Now, we can sort our data, and if you're used to using things like sort in an application like Excel, it does work slightly differently. So let's take a look at sorting. Maybe I want to sort this list alphabetically by the employee's name. So if you take a look at the title heading just here, you can see we have a little drop down arrow. If we click that, it's going to reveal our sorting and filtering options. And we only have 2 sorting options. We can choose to sort A to Z or Z to A. So I'm going to sort mine A to Z. The list is going to refresh, and now you can see it's sorting that alphabetically by the first name. Now, one thing that's worth noting here is that we don't have any type of clear sort button. So once you've applied a sort, we can't then clear it and put the list back to how it was originally. If we want to sort it by something else, we would just need to sort on a different column. For example, maybe I then want to sort by job title, A to Z. Now, another thing that differs in the way that sorting works in SharePoint to something like Excel is that we can't apply multiple sorts to columns. So currently I'm sorting A to Z by the title column, but I can't then say sort A to Z by job title as a secondary sort. If I sort A to Z by job title, it is just going to sort on that column. It's not going to take into account the previous sort I did in the other column. And you can see that illustrated quite nicely here. If we look at the job title brand manager, we have 3 people. Now in Excel, if I'd done this, because I'd applied an A to Z sort to the title column, the brand managers would be listed in alphabetical order. So we'd have Dwayne first, then Ronnie, then Tiffany. But that doesn't work the same in SharePoint, so just be aware of that. Now, it is possible to sort on 2 columns, and we're going to take a look at that a little bit later on. So those are really the only options you have when it comes to sorting lists of data. Now, what about filtering? Filtering allows us to filter out records that we're not particularly interested in and only view the information of most importance. So if we scroll across, let's go to the skill level column and click the drop down. We have a filter by option. So I'm going to click filter by. It's going to open up a pane on the right hand side, and I can now choose which skill level I'm most interested in. So maybe I only want to see employees who have a basic skill level. I can choose basic, click on apply, it's going to apply that filter, and that is literally all I'm going to see. It's going to filter out anybody whose skill level was intermediate or advanced. Now with filters, we do have a clear option. Notice on the right hand side, we have a clear filters button. Let's click it to put everything back into the list. Let's go to the job title column this time. Let's go to filter by. Here we have all of the job titles, and I can go through and I can select multiple if I want to. Or alternatively, we can click up in the find field and we can type in whatever it is that we're looking for. So if I type in manager, it's going to show me all of the job titles that have manager in them, and I can then choose the one that I'm interested in. So maybe brand manager. And I can then choose the one that I'm interested in. So maybe brand manager, it's going to select it. If I want all the managers, I can go in and I can select them, click on apply to apply that filter, and now I'm seeing all of the managers across all of the different departments. Notice also that when you have a sort or a filter applied to a column, we can see that indicated in the column header. So the job title column, I've sorted it and I have a filter applied, and we can see a little filter icon and also an up arrow. Let's clear the filter. Now, the final thing to talk about in this lesson is grouping. We can group our lists based on any of these fields. So maybe I want to group this time by location. If I click the drop down, notice we have a group by location option. Now, when I select that, you can see what it does. It's now grouping everybody based on where they're located. So we have location Frankfurt. There are 20 employees in Frankfurt. If we scroll down, the next group is London. We have 38 employees in London. Scroll down a bit further, we have New York, so on and so forth. And the thing with these groups is that they are collapsible and expandable. So I can click on the arrow to collapse those groups up and maybe just focus in on the location that I'm interested in. Now, it's also worth noting that you can sort grouped items as well. So now that I have these grouped, maybe I want to sort them alphabetically. So if I go to title A to Z, it's going to do that again. We have Frankfurt at the top, but now all of the employees are sorted into alphabetical order. And if we want to remove the grouping, if we just go back to the column where we applied the grouping, which in this case is location, we just need to uncheck group by location. So that is how you can sort, filter, and group list items in SharePoint. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can work with list views in SharePoint. So once again, we're working with the employee skill levels list. And what you'll notice is that when you're working inside any list, if you take a look in the top corner, you can see that the default view is what we call all items. And this basically means what it says on the tin. It's going to show all items in the list by default. And you'll find that all items is the default view for any list that you jump into. So if I was to jump into another list, so let's go into completed training. We don't have a great deal of information in there, but check it out in the top corner. All items is also selected because it's the default. Now it might be that we want to create different views for different lists. Now, when you're thinking about working with views, you're going to find all of your view options underneath this All Items drop-down. And you can see we have a few different things in this menu. Now, before we get on to creating a view, let's just deal with what we have in the top half of this menu: List, Compact List, and Gallery. So by default, I'm seeing all of my list items in List View. Now, I could switch this to Compact List. Now, I don't know if you noticed that because it's very subtle, but compact list really just applies a different way of viewing our list items. We have less room in between each list item, which means we can fit more on the page. So this is quite useful if you have very long lists and you want to see as many items on the page as possible. So don't forget that compact list view is there. We also have a gallery view, and if we switch into that, we're going to see each list item shown as a card as opposed to a row or a record. Now, which one of these you choose is entirely up to you. I'm going to jump back to the default, which is list. Now let's click the drop down once again. We can see we have all items selected, but check out what we have underneath. We can create new views. Now, in order to create a new view, you kind of need to set up your list to reflect how you want to view it before you create the view. So it might be that I'm the manager of the European region, and so I'm only interested in the employees who are in European-based offices. So for this list, that's going to be everybody in London and everybody in Frankfurt. So what I would do here is, before I create the view, I would filter this list. So we're going to go to the location column. Let's choose filter by, and I just want to see Frankfurt and London. Let's apply the filter. So now I have the view that I essentially want. I can save the view. So let's click the drop down. We're going to say save view as, and now I can give my view a name. So I'm going to call this European region only. Now notice underneath we have a checkbox that says make this a public view. And what that means is that if this view is made public, anybody who has access to this SharePoint site is going to be able to switch between this view. It means they don't have to create this view from scratch. So that's super helpful. Let's leave that ticked and click on Save. So now my view is saved, and you can see up here, instead of saying all items, it now says European region only. If I want to switch back to all items, I can simply click the drop down and click all items. So it now serves as a nice little toggle, and I can view my list in either of these views. Now, when we created the European region only view, we filtered the list and then we saved the view. But we do also have a create new view button. Now this kind of works in a similar way. You need to apply your filters and sort your list before you create the new view. So maybe this time I want to have a view that only shows people with an advanced skill level. So once again, I'd need to come to the skill level column. We're going to say filter by. We're going to choose advanced and click on apply. Now that I have the list filtered, I can jump back into here and I can create a new view. I can give my view a name. I'm going to call it advanced skill level, but this time we can specify if we want to show our items in a list, in a calendar, in a gallery, or in a board. Now I'm going to stick with list. I'm going to make this a public view. Let's click on create. So once again, that does exactly the same thing. I can now switch between all three of these views. Now, what about if you apply a view? So let's say advanced skill level, and then you think to yourself, actually, you know what? I don't need this view. I want to delete it. How do we delete views that we've created? Well, if I wanted to delete the advanced skill level view, if I click the drop down and go to edit current view, this is going to take me into the back end of SharePoint. This is all the stuff that kind of sits under the interface. So I'm now editing the view, and the first button we have at the top here is a delete button. So if I click on delete and click on OK, it's going to delete that view. And let's just go back to the drop down to confirm, yes, that it's gone. Now that editing area that we were just in that can be used for a lot more than just simply deleting views. So let's switch into our European region only view again, and we're going to edit the current view to jump back into that window. So from here I can make all different kinds of changes to the view. I could rename it from here. I could even go in and choose additional columns of information to display. So you can see everything that's ticked, those are the current columns that I'm seeing in this view. And you'll also notice that we have their position number from the left as well. So if you wanted to reorder your columns, you could do that from here simply by choosing a new position for each column heading. Now we're not going to do that. Notice that we can add lots of other columns as well. So I'm going to add an attachments column just here. If we scroll down, we can determine how we want to sort this view. Now, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about sorting that you can't sort on multiple columns, but this is where you can do this. So what I could say here is first sort by the column title. I want them in ascending order, and then I can sort by the column location, for example, and I want those in ascending order. And then underneath that, we have the filters that we have applied to this view. And again, we can change these filters from here if we need to. So you can see that currently this view is being filtered by location equal to Frankfurt and location equal to London. Because if you remember, when I applied the filters, we were filtering for the European region only. And once again, you can go in and you can change all of this information. Now underneath that we have a whole host of other things that we can do with this view, but these are outside the scope of this course, so we're just going to leave our view like this and we're going to click on OK. So now if we take a look at our list, you can see that locations are London and Frankfurt, so Europe only. And because we applied a sort to columns, the first column being the title column, you can see that those names are sorted A to Z. And then we had a secondary sort on the location column. And we can see that this column is sorted as well. Did you know that you can apply conditional formatting to lists in SharePoint? Well, if you didn't, that is exactly what this lesson is going to be about, because we haven't really spoken about formatting lists in too much detail. Now, I'm currently clicked on the employee skill levels list and I have selected the all items view. So this is just the default view. Now, the only other thing that I've done to this list is I've sorted it A to Z by the title column. So we have all of these names in alphabetical order. Now, the other thing that you might notice about this list is that we have what we call banded rows, and that is these grey alternating rows. Now again, this might be a concept that you're already familiar with if you've spent quite a bit of time working with other applications like Excel. Banded rows in general make your data a lot easier to read. So a lot of people really like to have banded rows turned on, some people don't. Now if you're wondering where the setting is to control these banded rows, you're going to find it underneath the All Items drop-down in Format Current View. So let's click to open this pane on the right hand side, and what you'll notice straight away is that alternating row styles is selected. So simply by selecting this option, it's going to apply these grey banded rows. Now it might be that you want your banded rows in a completely different colour. If that's the case, we can edit our row styles and we can choose a colour for odd rows and a colour for even rows. So maybe I want my odd rows to be in a pale blue and I want my even rows to be in, let's do something that's quite different, a pale peach. Now, I'm not saying that that is the greatest looking list you've ever seen, but hopefully you get the idea as to how you can modify this. Now, if you don't like this, you can simply reset to the default style. Notice we have a link for that at the bottom. So I'm going to click reset to default style. It's going to take it back to the very simple grey and white. So that is how you can determine what colour the odd and even rows are in your list. Now, if you don't like this banded row style at all, you can simply deselect alternating row styles and it's going to remove that row banding entirely. Now, aside from just regular formatting of banded rows, we can also utilize conditional formatting. And again, this might be a term that you've heard if you use an application like Excel. Now, conditional formatting will apply a background color to a row depending on criteria that we specify. For example, maybe I want to apply a background color to all rows where the department is equal to admin. So let's take that example and let's apply it. So I'm going to choose conditional formatting just here. And the first thing we need to do is specify how we want to show all values. So by default, we've got this grey background fill. Now, if you don't like that, you can click on the little text button just here, and I'm going to say no style. I don't want a background colour for all of the rest of my values that don't match my rule. So now we're going to add our rule, and we're going to say if the department column is equal to, and we're going to type admin. Now, notice underneath we have an add condition, so if we wanted to add another condition, we could. So I could say, if the department is equal to admin and the location is equal to London, apply this colour. And we'll do that in a moment just so you can see how that works, but for the time being, let's just stick to one rule. I can then choose the colour of the background fill. So I'm going to click the little text icon. Let's change this to let's go for a purpley colour, like so. Click on save, and what we should find is that rule has now been applied. So every time we have somebody in the admin department, that row is highlighted in the list. Now let's jump back into conditional formatting. Let's click on manage rules, because we can go back in here and we can change whatever rule we like. So there is my rule at the top. Let's click the three dots. I'm going to say edit rule. And let's add in another condition. So we want to say if the department is equal to, let's actually change this. We'll go for marketing. And if the location column is equal to London. And let's change the background fill. Let's go for a green this time. Click on save. Close the pane down, and now we have two rules in action. So it's only going to highlight records where the department is marketing and the location is London. So you can see we've got one just there. Do we have any more? Let's scroll down. Yep, we've got a few more down here. So we can build up our conditional formatting rules. We're not just stuck with one condition. Now let's just go back into formatting again. Let's manage our rules, and we're going to edit the rule. Because notice in here, as well as is equal to, we also have is not equal to. So I could say here is not equal to New York. So essentially what's different here is that it's going to apply the formatting to all records that are in the marketing department and records where the location is London or Frankfurt. We want everything that is not equal to New York. Let's click on save again and close this down, and we should find that we pick up some Frankfurt records in here as well, which we do. You can see there is one just there. There's some more Frankfurt records, and we also have London records. The final thing to really show you here is how you can delete a conditional formatting rule that you've set up. So maybe I decide that I don't want to apply this anymore. We're going to go into Format Current View. We're going to manage our rules. We're going to click the three dots, and we have a delete rule option in here. So I'm going to delete out this rule. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to say reapply my alternating row styles. Let's click on save, and that's how you can format your rows and also utilize conditional formatting in SharePoint lists. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can import a custom list into SharePoint. And the list that we're going to import is a list from Excel. Now, the reason why I'm using Excel is because Excel is an extremely popular application when it comes to creating tables and lists. A lot of the time, people will work predominantly in Excel when they're doing things like building an attendance log or creating any other type of list. And what we can do here is we can create a connection between an Excel spreadsheet and SharePoint so that when somebody changes the list in SharePoint, all we need to do is come back to Excel, refresh this table, and the changes will also update in the Excel worksheet. So in order to do this, we need to create a connection between SharePoint and our Excel spreadsheet. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this lesson. So I have my list open in Excel, and this is just an attendance log. So we can see the employees, we can see if they've attended, and we can see the course date. Now, a couple of things that I've done to this data prior to importing. I've put the data into a table. Now, if you're not that familiar with Excel, to put any type of data into an Excel table, you simply need to press the Control-T keyboard shortcut. Once you have your data in a table, you're going to have a table design ribbon at the top. And I highly recommend that in this first group just here, where we have table name, you give your table a meaningful name. You can see I've called mine attendance log. If we don't give our table a name, it's just going to be generically named Table 1, Table 2, Table 3, so on and so forth. It's also worth noting with these table names that you can't have any spaces in the name. So you can see that I've made attendance log all one word. Alternatively, you could separate the words with an underscore. So now that we've prepped our data, we can create a link to our SharePoint site. Now to do this, we need to go onto the table design ribbon, and this is the option that we want, the export option. Because notice the first option in here is export table to a SharePoint list. So let's click this. It's going to open up the export table to SharePoint list wizard. And we're currently working on step 1 of 2. So the first thing we need to define here is where do we want to publish our table, and then we have a field for the address. Now the address is basically the address of our SharePoint site. So let's jump back to SharePoint and just grab the URL. So this is the site that I want to import it into, the Microsoft 365 Training Hub. I'm going to go up to the URL bar, click to highlight, Control-C to copy, and then jump back to Excel. Now I can click in this field, and we can Control-V to paste that in. Now, if I want to create a read-only connection, meaning that people can't change the data, they can only view it, I would select the checkbox underneath. Now, we're not going to do that because I want people to be able to make changes and have it update. We then need to provide a name and a description for our table. So the name is going to be attendance log, and let's add a quick description. List to show all employees who have attended training. Let's click on next. Now what you're going to see in step 2 is basically Excel trying to match the data types. Now it's worth noting that the data types that you find in Excel are different to the data points that you find in SharePoint. So data types within Excel would be things like general, text, short date, currency, those formats that you might be used to using. Whereas in SharePoint we have things like text, single line. Now, all you really need to do here is go through each of your column headings, and these are the column headings that we have in the Excel spreadsheet, and make sure that the data type that it's picked up corresponds to the type of information that we have in these columns. So I can see that for most of these, we have text single line. And if I look at the employee column, the job title column, location and attendance, these are all text, so that is fine. For the course date column, it's picked up that this is a date data type, and again, that is correct. So all I need to do here is click on Finish. Now Excel is going to go away and it's going to create that connection in the form of a query between the Excel spreadsheet and SharePoint. And you can see here I'm now getting a message saying the table was successfully published and may be viewed on, and we can click on the link to jump to the site. And there we go, we can now see that imported list. And we can work with this list within SharePoint much like we would any other list. We can make changes by editing in the grid view. We can add columns onto the end. Now I'm going to exit grid view. I don't want to make any changes as yet. But one thing worth noting is that when you import a list in this way, SharePoint is actually using the Lists app in Microsoft 365. If you take a look at the employee names, to the left of each of the names, we have this little icon. And this is the icon that represents the Lists app. And what I'm going to do to make this a bit easier to find is I'm going to click the star next to attendance log to favorite the list. And then we're going to jump across to the Lists app because I just want to show you how this exists in its own separate application. So in the favorites area, there it is. There is our attendance log. I can click on it and it's going to open up that same list. But this time we're working with it in the Lists application. So just bear that in mind. We're effectively viewing this list within the Lists app within SharePoint. Now, another thing that people really struggle with when they're working with lists like this is if we click away, so let's click on Home, for example, because we haven't added this list into the navigation on the left-hand side, people sometimes struggle to find where their list is stored. Now, it is worth noting that there are a couple of things you can do here. The list exists, and if you want to find it, you can click on Settings and you can go to Site Contents and you'll find the list lurking in here. So if we go down, there it is, attendance log. We can click and it's going to open up in SharePoint. So that's one way you can find it, but it's not the most convenient way sometimes. What would be much more convenient is to add it to the navigation pane, much like all of our other lists. So how can we do that? Well, once again, if we go up to the cog, we can go to List Settings and click on the List Name Description and Navigation link. And what you'll find in here is the opportunity to change the name of the list and the description, but we can also define if we want to display it on the quick launch. That is the left-hand navigation pane. So I'm going to say yes. Let's click on Save, and we should find that on the left-hand side, there it is, Attendance Log. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to quickly rename this so that it matches everything else. So we want to say List dash Attendance Log and click on Save. So now that we've done that, it's just a lot easier to be able to access this list. And the cool thing about this attendance log is that because we have a connection set up, any changes that are made in SharePoint will reflect in Excel. So I'm going to go to this first record just here, and we're going to change attended from yes to no. Let's click away. And we're going to exit grid view. I can see that that change has saved. Let's jump back to Excel. So all we need to do to update this table of data and change the first record from yes to no is simply go up to the table design ribbon, go to refresh and choose refresh all. So adding lists into Quick Launch just makes them a lot easier for everybody to access. I just want to finish up this section on lists by introducing you to the recycle bin. Now, most of us who use Windows PCs or even people who use Mac will have access to a recycle bin. Now, for me, my recycle bin lives on my desktop and you can see it all the way in the top left-hand corner. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because the recycle bin that we use for our Windows files is different to the recycle bin that we use within SharePoint. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we delete something in SharePoint, whether it be a list, a library, or a document, you won't be able to find it in the recycle bin on your Windows PC. Each SharePoint team site has its own recycle bin. And if you take a look in the Quick Launch menu, you'll see there is mine right at the bottom. So if we click on this, what we're going to see are all of the items that we've deleted. And you can see I've deleted a few different things in here. I've deleted a couple of pages and I've deleted quite a few different lists. We can see the date that those files were deleted, who they were deleted by, who they were created by, and also the original location that they were deleted from. So when you do delete something in SharePoint, it isn't immediately removed from the system. You have a certain period of time in which you can come into the recycle bin and restore the deleted item if you need to. Now, the retention period currently is 93 days. So when 93 days passes, the files in the recycle bin will be permanently deleted. And it's from that point that you can't get them back. But we have a period of a good 3 months where they will stay in the recycle bin and we can restore them back to their original location. So let's say, for example, I want to restore the attendance log just here. I could select it and then notice in the top I have two options, delete or restore. Now, if I was to choose delete, that is effectively forcing SharePoint to delete the file permanently. So if I don't want to wait 93 days, and I definitely know that I want to delete one or more files from the recycle bin, I can force that through by clicking the delete button. Alternatively, we can restore the file back to its original location. So if I click on restore, it's telling me that I already have another file with the same name. And that is true. After I deleted this test one, I then went in and created another list called attendance log. So let's actually try and restore a different file. I'm going to go for this page just here, home. Let's click on restore. That's worked. It's disappeared from the recycle bin. And that is a SharePoint page. So if I go to pages, I can see that there it is, there is home. If I select it one more time and delete it, this time I can click the three dots and go to delete. That's going to put that file back into the recycle bin. There it is at the top. The final point to note here is that when we are in the recycle bin, in the top left-hand corner, we have an empty recycle bin option. So as I said, that is essentially like bringing forward the 93-day retention period, and it means we are permanently deleting all of the files in the recycle bin immediately. Now, my recommendation is always to keep your files there for the full 93 days, because you never know when you're going to need to go back and retrieve a file. So you might as well keep them on the system for as long as possible. So those are the options that you have when it comes to working with the recycle bin, deleting and restoring libraries, lists, pages, and documents. It's time now to do exercise 3. And in this exercise, we're going to get a chance to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course on SharePoint lists. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to download the file customers.xlsx from the exercise files folder. And I'd like you to import that data from Excel into SharePoint. And I'd like you to name the list within SharePoint customers. Once you've done that, I'd like you to sort the list from A to Z by customer name and apply a filter to show only trips going to the Asia region. And then I'd like you to save the sorted and filtered list as a new view called Asia region. I'd then like you to add that list to the quick launch pane to make it easily accessible via that navigation menu. I'd also like you to practice switching between views in your list. So make sure that you can switch between seeing all of the list items and only the list items in the filtered and sorted view. And then finally, I'd like you to apply conditional formatting to the original view that highlights trips that are above $2,000. So a few different things to do there. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing that I asked you to do was to download the Excel file customers.xlsx from the exercise files folder. And this is what that file looks like. It has 50 or so records. So now that we have this, we want to import this into SharePoint as a SharePoint list. So let's jump back to our Contoso travel site. We're going to click on New, and we're going to say New List. Now from here we get a few different options. We want to import from Excel, and this is where we can upload the file. So let's click Upload, and your file is probably going to be in your Downloads folder if you've just downloaded it from the Exercise Files folder. So navigate to where you have it stored, select it, and click on Open. So now it's gone away, it's loaded up those tables, and if I take a look across at these data types, everything looks pretty good. Let's click on Next. I asked you to name it Customers, and I also asked you to make sure that this list is displayed in Site Navigation. So we want to make sure that we have a tick in this box just here. Let's click on Create. So the next thing I asked you to do was to sort the list of customer names, A to Z, and we only want to see the records for the Asia region. And I asked you to create a new view to display this. So if we go up to all items, let's say create new view. We're going to call it Asia region and click on create. So now we're working in the Asia region view. We can apply our sort and our filter. So let's go to customer name. We're going to say A to Z. Let's go to region, filter by. We're going to choose Asia and click on apply. And just to make sure, we want to save this view as Asia region. Click on Save. And then I asked you to make sure that you can switch between your two views. So now we're looking at the Asia region, but I can click the drop down, go to all items, and I can see the original view. Also notice that our customers list has been added to the quick launch navigation menu on the left hand side. The final thing I asked you to do was to conditionally format all of the records where the trip price is greater than $2,000. And I asked you to apply this conditional formatting to the original view. So that is the all items view that we're currently in. So we're going to click the drop down. We're going to go to Format Current View, and we're going to choose Conditional Formatting. Now, I don't mind what colors you use here. I'm going to say no styles for all of the records, but we are going to add a rule. And it's going to say if the column trip price is greater than $2,000, and then you can choose whatever color you like. So let's go for a green, click on Save, and our conditional formatting rule is applied. That's all I need you to do in this exercise. I hope you got an okay with that, and I will see you in the next section. Document libraries are where we store all of our files and folders in SharePoint. They provide a secure and centralized storage area that's accessible by all members of the team site. And by default, when you're working in a SharePoint team site, you're going to get a default document library. And you can find a link to that in the navigation menu on the left-hand side. So you can see here we have a document library link, but also note that when we're working on the home page of our team site, we have the document library web app included. So you can also see a smaller window over on the right hand side that is actually showing the document library for this particular SharePoint site. So we can access our files and folders directly from the home page, or alternatively, if we want to see a larger view, we can go to the navigation menu, click on document library, and it's going to open it in its own window, which I think makes this library a little bit easier to work with. We can navigate through the folder structure as you might expect. So if I click on General, it's going to take me into that folder and reveal any files that we have beneath there. Notice when you're working in the document library, we have just above what we call a breadcrumb trail. And this helps us navigate between the different folders in the document library. So currently I'm clicked on General, but if I want to go back a level, I can simply click on Documents and I can then see all of my folder list. And the cool thing about document libraries in SharePoint is that they do translate across to other Microsoft 365 applications. So if we create a document library for this team site and then open up Outlook, for example, and then if we scroll all the way down to where we have groups at the bottom, you can see I have a Microsoft 365 group for this particular SharePoint team site. If I click on it, I'm now working within that group, and notice that we have some icons at the top here. So I could go to Group Files. If I click this, it's basically going to jump me across to the SharePoint library. And you can see if I scroll down, the folders are exactly the same. If I click on General, we're going to see the Employee Skill Levels Excel file. We can also get directly to the SharePoint site associated with this group. So if I click the three dots and go to Site, that's going to take me to the team site homepage. So the takeaway point here is that you can also access your SharePoint document library and upload files to it from within Outlook. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, the document library is a default setting when creating a SharePoint site. However, you can create more than one document library. Maybe you need a couple of them to store different types of documents, or maybe you want different document libraries to represent different teams. And the process of creating a brand new document library is extremely simple. Notice on the homepage we have a New button. If we click the New drop-down, we can choose Document Library, and then we can give our new library a name. So maybe I want this to be an image library. Yes, I'm going to show it in the site navigation, so I'm going to keep that ticked. Let's click on Create. So the page is going to refresh, and if we take a look at the bottom of the list, we can now see Image Library is just there. Now, maybe I want to move that up the list. If I click the Edit link, I can then literally drag and drop it into the location that I need it to be. And I'm going to place mine directly under the document library and click on Save. So now we have an empty document library that's ready for us to upload files and folders. In the previous lesson, I showed you how you can create a second document library. And we created a document library and called it Image Library. So now we have our empty library, we're going to want to upload and share documents with others. Now, there are a couple of different things that we can do here. We can upload existing documents that we have saved off somewhere else, or we can create brand new documents from directly within the SharePoint document library. Now, we're going to do that in a moment, but we're going to start out by simply uploading some files into this image library. Notice that when you're working within a document library, you have a menu bar that runs across the top. And the second option that we have is an upload option. And we can choose to upload files, we can upload folders, or we can upload a template. So I'm going to start by uploading some files that I have saved off to my PC. And because this is an image library, I'm going to upload some image files. So let's click on Files, and I'm going to upload the 3 JPG files. So that's Meeting, Office Worker, and Technology. So we can select multiple and upload them all at the same time. If you want to upload these files, you're going to find them in the Course Files folder. So let's click on Open. SharePoint's going to go away and it's going to start to upload those files. And you can see that that just takes a couple of seconds. So now those images are uploaded and accessible to anybody who's a member of this team site. And of course, once we've uploaded a file, we can hover over it to get a little bit of a preview. We can click the three dots to see more options, so we can preview the file. We can share it, we can copy the link, we can delete it, we can download it, we can rename it. Lots of options in here. So really straightforward and simple. Now, another thing that we could do in here is we could add a little bit of structure by creating folders. Now, when it comes to folders, if we go to the upload button, you can see we have a folder option in here. Now, this isn't the one that we want in this example. We would use this if we had a folder of files stored on our PC and we wanted to upload them all in one go within the folder. If we want to create a new folder in here, we would need to click the new drop down and choose folder. So I'm going to say these are approved images. Let's click on create. So now I have a folder in here. You can see it looks different from the actual files because we have this yellow folder icon. And if I want to move any of these files to this folder, I can simply select them and I can drag and drop on top of the folder. So a really simple way to add a bit of structure into our document libraries. Now I'm going to switch to the document library. So let's click on that in the navigation menu. And I'm going to go into the general folder. And we're going to upload a couple more files. So once again, we're going to go to upload. We're going to choose files. And this time we're going to upload the business proposal, the copy for the website, and the sales pitch. So I have a mixture of Word and PowerPoint files. Let's click on open. The process is exactly the same. SharePoint is telling us that it's uploading these three items, and there they are. And this synchronizes across all of the Microsoft 365 applications. So if we were to go back into Outlook, go to the Microsoft 365 group for this site and click on Files, you can see underneath Recent, it's showing me the three files I've just uploaded. And if I jump into the actual general folder, there are the updated files. So the synchronization process is pretty much instantaneous. Now, the final thing to really walk through in this lesson is how we can create a file on the fly from within the document library, because we don't have to have them already created and saved off to our PC in order to upload. So if we go back to the new button, notice that we have all of these different file types that we can create from directly within SharePoint. So let's go for Excel Workbook. It's going to open up a brand new blank workbook in Excel Online. I can add my data, and I'm just going to put test data at the top here, and then we can simply rename this file. Now, to rename the file, we can click up here where it says book, and we can give our file a name. And you can see just below, it's going to save it into that general folder. So let's call this budget analysis and hit enter. So now if we close this down, you can see there it is. It updates immediately. There is my budget analysis. And anybody who has access to this team site can click on this file to open it and start working immediately. And of course, any changes that are made will be synchronized across all of Microsoft 365. So that's how simple it is to upload existing files and also create new files in document libraries in SharePoint. In the last lesson, we saw how we can upload files and folders into SharePoint document libraries. And in this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can work with your files online and co-author your files with other team members. So I'm currently clicked on the document library, and in the last lesson, we uploaded 3 files: business proposal, copy for website, and sales pitch. And we created a new file called budget analysis. Now, one thing to note here is that when you've just created a file, that will be indicated in the SharePoint document library by these 3 little red lines. That's how you know that it's a brand new file. Now, when it comes to editing files, you have a couple of different options. You can choose to edit the files online, or you can download them and edit them in the desktop versions of your applications. Remember, when you're working with Microsoft 365, we have a lighter online version of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, so on and so forth. But we also have the option to download the full desktop versions as well. So really, depending on what you want to do with the file will determine the choice that you make. For example, if I wanted to do a mail merge in a Word document, I know that mail merge isn't available in the online version of Word. I would need to download that and open it in the full desktop version. So how do we do that? How do we make that choice? Well, let's go for this business proposal document. If we click on the three dots, notice the first option is to open. And then we get a choice to open in browser, which will open it in Word Online, or open in the app. And that's going to open it in the full desktop version. Now, I will say that if you're just making light edits, you can open it in the browser and you pretty much have everything that you need. So this is a slimmed down version of the full version of Word, but if you check out the ribbons, you can see that most of the things that you're probably going to want to do with this document, you can do from here. And this is brilliant because the online versions of all of the applications are available wherever you have an internet connection. So I could be sitting on the train, I could log into my Microsoft 365 account through a browser, and I could open this document and start working on it from my phone, from a tablet device, or maybe from my laptop. I don't have to be at my desk with the full desktop version in order to carry on working. The other advantage of using the online version is that it enables co-authoring. So as we already know, if we jump back to SharePoint for a second, there are 11 members of this site, and we can see all of the members just here. So everybody in this list has access to this document library and can open up these files and work on them. So I have the business proposal document open, but if, say, my colleague Adele also opens it, we can both work on the document together. Now I'm going to show you an example of this, but I'm going to use a different file. Let's go for budget analysis instead. So if we click on the three dots, I'm going to open it in the browser, which will open it in Excel Online, and I can then start making my changes. Now, what happens if somebody else logs into this while I have it open? Well, check it out. Alex has just jumped into this file. I can see exactly where he's clicked because it's highlighted in purple and I can see his name. Also notice up next to the comments button, I can see his profile photo. And this is cool because it doesn't matter where he clicks, I can see exactly what he's typing. And the same goes for Alex. If I was to type something in here, he's also going to see that live update. And this is what we call co-authoring, and it's an awesome feature of working with the online applications. So we can collaborate seamlessly on our documents, and everything that we're doing is automatically saving back. Remember, when you're working in the online versions, if we click on File, there isn't a Save button, there is only a Save As. And that's because we don't need the Save button because it automatically saves back to SharePoint. I would use Save As if I wanted to rename this file as something else or change the location where it's saved. And this process applies to editing all of these documents. If we open in the online version, let's go for this PowerPoint one, I can start working in the presentation, and I can see that Alex has also jumped into this file. I can see Alex Wilbur on the first slide, and I can see his profile photo at the top here. So again, we're both co-authoring this presentation. Now, there are a couple of other things that you can do when you're editing these files. For example, if we click the three dots and go to open, if I was to open this in the app instead of the browser, you can see it's going to open in the Word desktop application. So as I mentioned, this is the full version of Word where we have things like mail merge on the mailings ribbon. So for any edits that are pretty complex that you find you can't do in the online version, you're going to need to open in the desktop version. And also notice when you're working in the desktop version, we have this little auto save slider toggled on. And what that means again is that we don't have to keep clicking save because it's automatically saving back to the SharePoint file, ensuring that everything is kept synchronized. And then another option that we do have is if we click the three dots, we could also choose to download this file. Now this is going to download a copy of the file to the downloads folder on your PC. So when you open this file and start to make changes, you're working on the copy. So let's download the file. You can see downloads at the top. I'm going to say open. It's going to open in the desktop version. I'm going to say enable editing, and I'm going to change this title from red to, let's just make that a bright green so it really stands out. Now, because this is a downloaded file, notice that autosave is turned off because we're not actually working on the copy in SharePoint. We're working on a completely separate copy. So this time I do need to click save to save that change. If we close this document down and then reopen it in the online version, Notice that that change hasn't taken effect because effectively we now have two separate copies. So if you do download a file and make changes, in order to get that to update, you would need to re-upload the file into the SharePoint document library. So if I go to Upload and Files, I'm going to find it in the Downloads folder. Let's select it and click on Open. And it's telling me that this file already exists, and that's because they have exactly the same name. So I'm going to say keep both, and what it will do is it will rename the one I've just uploaded, and it will add a 1 after it. So I could choose to keep both, or I could just choose to delete this one, and then rename the file I've just uploaded. So I'm just going to remove the 1 from after it. So now if we give this a preview, we should find that we have the one with the green text in it. So just be aware of those differences. There is a difference between working on online versions of your files and downloading copies. So we've been working on files within our SharePoint document library. And when we're looking at the document library, as we are now, we're in the General folder, we're looking at the standard default view. And what I mean by that is we have a name column which shows the name of the document. We can see when it was last modified. We can see who it was modified by, and that is pretty much it. So in terms of column headings, we don't have a great deal of information just here. Now with these column headings, notice that when I hover over, I can move these. So if I want to make them wider or narrower, I can do that. But I can also customize the way that I'm viewing my document libraries. So this is very similar to customizing list views. We can also customize our library views. So if I wanted to see some more information here, I could add a column. Now, if I click on Add Column just here, this is if I want to add editable columns. For example, if I scroll down, I could maybe add a location column. I could give this a name. So let's just say we want a column that shows me which office has edited this file. And we're going to go with city only. Let's click on Save. So now anyone can go in and they can add in the relevant office information next to each of these files. Now that's fine, you can customize your columns in that way, but a lot of the time I don't necessarily want to have columns that people can edit. I might just want to have columns that show more information. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit this column and I'm going to delete it. And what we're going to do instead is we're going to click the All Documents drop down and we're going to say Edit Current View. Now this is going to take me into the back end where I have all of the settings for this particular document library. And if we go to the Columns section, you can see that everything that is ticked is what I'm currently displaying in my view. And this looks more like what I was expecting. For example, maybe I want to see who created the document. Maybe I want to see the file size. And maybe I want to see the version at the bottom. So I can select those columns, click on OK, and now my view has refreshed and we can see created, file size, and version. So let's jump back into General. You can see that that flows through. So I can see very easily now that this is the 4th version of the budget analysis. And we're going to talk more about versions towards the end of this section. So just know that you can go in and you can customize the way that you're viewing your document libraries. Now, if you do modify your view and do things like add more columns in, this isn't going to be the default setting. So if I was to create a new document library, or even if I was to switch to the image library, you can see that those changes don't carry across. But what we can do is we can click the All Documents drop down and we can save the view. So I'm going to say Save View As, and I'm going to say Detailed View, and click on Save. So now that I've saved the view is available for me to select. And because I made this a public view, it means that everybody who has access to this team site can also see this view and switch between it. So it might be that you want to create a few different views and easily be able to switch between them. And you can do that by saving the view. Now, if you want your view that you've created, so this one here, the detailed view, to be the default, we can choose Set Current View as default. And that means that whenever we come in here, it's always going to default to this view. So this is very similar to what we looked at earlier when we customized our list view. And don't forget that when we do have these column headings, notice we have drop-down arrows next to them, which means we can use this as a sort. So if I want to sort and see all the largest file sizes at the top, I can say sort larger to smaller, and I can see that the sales pitch is the largest file that I have. So that is how simple it is to customize library views when you're working in SharePoint. Version control is a really important thing to understand when you're working with files in your SharePoint document libraries. And if you recall, in the last lesson where we customized our document library view, we added in a version column. And I would highly recommend that you do this because it provides such useful information. So if we take a look at the version column, we can see in here how many versions of each document we have. So what exactly is a version? Well, when we first create a document, that is going to be version 1. And it might be that we create it from the new drop-down, or we could upload it from our PC. As soon as it hits this SharePoint document library, it is registered as version 1 of this document. Now, SharePoint will automatically create a new version when that file is opened and changes are made. So you can see here this PowerPoint presentation, sales pitch deck. If I was to click the 3 dots, and I'm just going to open it in my browser, and I'm going to make some changes. So I'm just going to change the author of this document to myself. So I've made a change. Remember, because we're working in the online version, I don't need to click save in order to save that change because it's automatically saving back to SharePoint. So if I close down this PowerPoint presentation, and sometimes you need to refresh your browser, you can see that the version number has now updated to 2. And that's simply because I made a change. So SharePoint will track every time the document is opened. It will recognize if changes have been made, and if they have, it's going to create an automatic new version. So the highest version number is always going to be the latest version. You can see for the budget analysis Excel spreadsheet, we have 4 versions of this. Now, why is this so useful? Well, it might be that we have lots of people working on the business analysis spreadsheet, but the last person who edited it made a mistake, and we kind of want to roll back those changes and go to a previous version. That is where version control comes in. So let's do it with the change that we've just made on this sales pitch. So if we click the 3 dots, notice that we have a version history option. And what this will do is it will show you all of the versions of that document. So you can see here, version 1 was created on the 28th of the 8th, 2023 at 6:27 a.m. whereas version 2 was created at 7:03. And both of these versions were modified by myself. So let's use budget analysis as our example. We have 4 versions of this. Now, let's say that my colleague who modified it last made a mistake, and we need to roll back to the previous version and effectively reverse that mistake. This is where version control really comes in useful. If we click the 3 dots and go to version history, it's going to pop open a window that shows us all of the different versions. We can see the date and time that they were created, who last modified them, and also the size. So if I wanted to roll back to the previous version, version 3, I would just simply need to click the drop down and choose Restore. So notice what it's done there. It's now created a version 5, which is effectively the version 3 that we've restored. And when we click to open this file, we'll effectively be looking at the version 3 version. So it's always a good idea to have this version column turned on so you can see how many versions there are, and just know that if you do need to roll back any changes, you can simply restore the previous version. Now, it's worth noting with this, if we jump back into version history, we don't just necessarily have to restore the previous version, we could restore any of these versions. So if I wanted to take it all the way back to how it was originally, I could restore version 1. So if we click that and choose Restore, we're going to say yes, let's replace the current version. And what we'll get is version 6, and this will basically be what the file looked like before anybody changed it. So version control is super useful and allows you to backtrack and restore older versions of the file. When you're working in a SharePoint team site, and specifically in a SharePoint document library where we have lots of members, we know that we have 11 members of this site, the document library is going to be pretty busy. There's going to be people diving in and out of here and making changes to files constantly. Now, it might be that there are specific files that are important to you and you want to be alerted or notified when anything changes on those files. Well, we can do that within SharePoint document libraries by setting up an alert. So let's say that this business proposal is a document that's very important to me, and I want to know immediately if somebody makes any changes to this document so I can review them. So what I could do here is click the three dots and notice towards the bottom of this menu we have Alert Me. So I'm going to click on this and it's going to pop open this window, Alert Me when items change. So the first thing I can do here is set a title for my alert. Now I'm pretty happy with this title. It tells me the folder that it's in and it also tells me the file that's been modified. Now I could change this to something else, but this basically contains all the information that I need. We can then choose who to send alerts to. Now because I'm setting up an alert on this document, it's automatically put my name in the users field. But if my colleagues, maybe Alex and Adele, also want alerts, I could add them into here. So I'm going to choose Adele and I'm also going to choose Alex. I then get to choose how the alert is delivered to me. So do I want to be notified that something's changed on this document by email? And you can see my email address just there, or by text message. Now I'm going to choose email. I'm happy with that. And then I can choose what changes will trigger an alert. So I can say here, send me an alert when anything changes on this document. Or I could get an alert when someone else changes a document. Or when someone else changes a document that's specifically been created by me. Or when someone else changes a document last modified by me. So I'm going to say when anything changes, and then I can choose when to send alerts. So if I want to receive the alert immediately as soon as that document is changed, I would choose the first option. Now, if documents are changing all the time and you have quite a few alerts set up, sending notifications immediately could make your inbox extremely busy. So what you might prefer to do is get a daily or a weekly summary. So if I were to choose a daily summary, it means that I'm not going to receive an alert immediately when the modification is made, but I will get an email at the end of the day, which will show a list of all of the changes that have been made to that document during the day. So that might be a better option for you. Now, just in the case of this example, we're going to say send notification immediately. So let's click on OK. Now, looking at my document library and the business proposal document, I can see something that's changed here. It says modified by Alex Wilbur. So Alex has made a change. So I should have received an email alert about this change. So let's jump across to Outlook and check to see if it's there. And I can see that yes, the alert has been received in my inbox. Now in that example, we set up an alert for an individual document within the document library. But we could set up an alert on the whole document library. So I'm in the general folder of the document library. Notice the horizontal menu bar running across the top. If we click the three dots, we have an alert me option just here as well. But this time, this is related to the entire document library. Now in the previous example, we looked at how we can set up an alert for an individual document. But what if we want to set up an alert for the entire general folder or maybe the entire document library? Well, we can definitely do that as well. So if I want to set up an alert so that when anything changes on any of the files within the general folder, all I need to do is navigate to the folder, which I've already done, click the three dots, and we can set up an alert. So this time the alert title is Documents General. All of the options are the same. We can go through, we can add people to send alerts to, we can choose if we want to send them by email or text message, and we can choose what type of alert we want to send. So I'm going to keep these all on the default settings. Let's click on OK. So once again, I can see that the modified column has changed. Alex has made a change to the budget analysis worksheet. You can see here in the modified column, he is the last person who modified it. So because a change has been made to a file that's within the general folder and I have alerts set up for this folder, I should have received an email. So if we jump back to Outlook, check out what we have at the top. If I click on this, it says budgetanalysis.xlsx has been changed by Alex Wilbur. So just remember that alerts can be created for individual files within a document library, individual folders like the general folder, or the entire document library. When it comes to sharing documents in SharePoint Online, we have a few different options. And really, the sharing options that are available to us, we really only need them when we want to share a file outside of our team members. Because if you recall, when we create a SharePoint team site and we add members, this site has 11 members. Everybody in this members list has access to all of the document libraries and all of the files within this team site. So we wouldn't necessarily need to share a link or a copy of any of these files with people who are already members, because they can literally just jump into the document library themselves and work on the files. But if I want to share a link to a file that I have stored in SharePoint with maybe somebody outside of my organization, that is where the sharing options come into play. So let's go to the general folder. And let's say that I want to share this business proposal with somebody outside of my organization who isn't a member of this site. So what we can do here is notice that we have this little share button. It's also worth noting that if we click the three dots, we have a share option in here as well. Both of those are going to take you to exactly the same place. I can now choose who I want to share this document with. Now, ordinarily, I would share with someone outside of my organization. Just for this demonstration, we're going to choose Adele. I then get to specify what level of access this person has to this document. So it might be that I want them to be able to just view the document, maybe just read it, but not make any edits. If that's the case, I would choose Can View from this drop-down. If I do want to give her full access, I could choose Can Edit. The other option we have in here is Can Review, and that means that the person can view the document and suggest changes via things like comments. Now I'm going to say that I want to give full access to this document. I want her to be able to edit it. I can then add a message, and then right at the bottom I get two options. I could choose to copy the link, or I could send this off. Now if I was to click on Send, this is going to send a link to this document via an email message. So Adele will receive that email, she'll click on the link, and it will jump her across to this document that's essentially stored in SharePoint. And the level of access that she has to the document is determined by whatever we selected in here. So that is the first way that you could share this document. The other thing we could do is we could simply copy the link. And notice it says people in MSFT with the link can edit. Now MSFT is my organization. So I could choose to copy the link and then maybe paste it into a Teams channel, or maybe paste it into an Outlook email. You have both of those options down here. Now I'm going to send it this way. Let's click on Send, and that link has now been shared with Adele. And that's pretty much as complicated as sharing files gets in SharePoint Online. Remember, you don't need to share with any of the members of your team site because they already have access. It's time now to complete exercise 4. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section about document libraries. So the first thing I'd like you to do in the Contoso Travel site is I'd like you to create a new document library called Travel Images. Now I'd like you to download the folder called Travel Images from the Exercise Files folder. You'll find 7 images within that folder. And then I'd like you to upload the entire folder into the image library. I'd also like you to download the folder called Travel Documents from the Exercise Files folder. And I'd like you to upload the files in this folder to the document library in SharePoint. Once you have all of the files in their respective file libraries, I'd like you to open any of the Excel files, so one of the Q1 to Q4 sales files, in Excel Online and practice making edits. If you can share the file with someone else and get them to make edits too, even better. If not, it's fine if you're the only one making some changes. I'd like you to ensure that you understand the concept of version control, and then I'd like you to restore the version 1 of the file that you just edited. And the final part of this exercise is just to practice setting up an alert on any of the documents in the document library. And I'd like to ensure that you receive a daily alert when other people make changes to the document. So a few different things to do there. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing that I asked you to do here was to create a new document library called Travel Images. So we're going to click the new drop down. We're going to choose Document Library, and we're going to call this Travel Images. I'm going to choose to show it in Site Navigation. Let's click on Create. The next thing I asked you to do was to make sure that you downloaded the folder Travel Images from the Exercise Files folder. And then I wanted you to upload those images into the Travel Images library. So we're going to go to Upload. Now, I don't mind if you chose to upload the individual files or the entire folder. Let's go for folder. We need to select the folder, Travel Images, and click on Upload. I'm going to say yes, I want to upload all 7 files. Let's click the Upload button, and there we go. So now when we click on this folder, we should have access to all of those image files. The next thing I asked you to do was to go to the Documents library, so we just need to click on Documents and upload the folder Travel Documents. So let's select it and click on Upload. And we're going to upload 6 files this time. So there it is. If we click on it, we can see those files underneath. So we've got a mixture of Word and Excel files in here. I then asked you to open one of the Excel files from the document library and open it in Excel Online. So let's just grab Q Sales 1. I'm going to click the 3 dots. We're going to open in Browser to make sure that opens online. And I asked you to make some changes to this document. So let's go in and change a couple of prices. We're going to say that one's $1,400. Let's change this to $1,200 down here. Let's change this to $1,000, for example. So I've made a few changes, and those changes have automatically saved back via the cloud. So now when I close this down, I should find that I have 2 versions of this document because I've just made changes to it. And the next part of this exercise was to restore the version 1. So let's hover over Q1 Sales. We're going to click the 3 dots and go to Version History. Notice there we have the 2 files. We have the original file in its state when I uploaded it, and then the file that contains the changes I just made. So I want to restore version 1. Let's click the drop down and choose Restore. We're going to say yes. It's going to create a version 3, but this latest version is going to be the version before I made the changes. And the final thing I asked you to do in this exercise was to set up an alert on any of these documents. So let's choose Travel Itineraries. Maybe I want to create an alert when anything changes on this document. So I'm going to click the 3 dots. We're going to say Alert Me. I want the alerts sent to me. I want them sent via email. So I'm going to select those settings. I'm going to choose when someone else changes the document, and I asked you to set this so you receive a daily summary. Let's click on OK, and the alert is set up on that document. That's it for this exercise. I will see you in the next section. We can create a discussion board and add it to our SharePoint team site. And a discussion board is great if you want a centralized area where all of your team members can post questions and respond to other questions that have been posted. If you've ever used something like an online forum, maybe you've gone there to get some help, then that is kind of like what a discussion board is in SharePoint. Now, when we're thinking about adding a discussion board to our page, it's not the most obvious where you need to go. Now, the discussion board is essentially an app that we need to add in to SharePoint. But in order to do this and be able to find the discussion board, we need to switch back to classic SharePoint. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by classic SharePoint, SharePoint is kind of in a transition phase where we're halfway between the old version of SharePoint and the newer, more modern version of SharePoint. And the course so far has been entirely using the modern interface. Now, if I was trying to add the SharePoint app from the modern interface, I'd go up to the cog icon, I'd go to Add an App, and it shows me a list of some of the popular apps that I could add. But when I search for discussion board up here, it doesn't bring back any results. So I'm going to type in discussion, and you can see no results have been found. Now, notice what it says just here, no matching results found. Built-in apps such as custom lists, document libraries, calendar, and others can be found in the classic experience. So here we have a link back to that classic experience. So let's click on it, and we're taken across to the older interface of SharePoint. And this is where we can add different apps into our site. So we can add things like document libraries, we can add custom lists, task lists, so on and so forth. And if we scroll down, one of them is discussion board. So let's click to add that in. So now we need to give our discussion board a name. So I'm just going to call this Training Team Discussion Board. Let's click on Create. So it's taken me across to my site contents. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see there is the discussion board that we've just created. Now, if I click on this, it's going to open it up, and this is where we can go in and start creating new discussions and replying to any existing discussions. So I'm going to click on New Discussion. Let's give it a subject. I'm going to call it Feedback on Training, and then I can either add a comment, or if I have a question that I'm asking to the discussion board members, I can check the question box at the bottom just here. So this means that I'm looking for answers from other members. So let's type in our question. How do you think training is going so far? And let's click on Save. And there it is. I've posted that to the discussion board. Now, notice at the top we have some filters here, so I can go to My Discussions. That's going to show me any discussions that I've started. So we're seeing feedback on training, and then unanswered questions. So again, it's bringing back that same discussion that I started because nobody has responded to it as yet. And if somebody wants to respond, they can simply click on Feedback on Training. And of course, anybody who has access to this site can jump in here, click on Reply, and type a response. So I'm just going to type a response to my own question. I'm just going to type in good so far, and then click on Reply. And of course, under each of these, we have an edit link if we need to edit our question. And if we click the three dots, we can set up alerts on discussion boards and specific posts. So if maybe I wanted to be alerted every time somebody replied to this post, I could definitely do that from here. I can mark this as featured. So if this is a particularly important discussion, I can essentially feature that on the discussion board, or I can delete the question entirely. So that's pretty much how this discussion board works. Now, notice in the navigation menu on the right-hand side, we have Training Team Discussion Board just here. Now, remember, we're currently working in the classic experience. So if I close this down and let's go back to our start page, again, this might be where you want to add your discussion board into the quick launch menu on the left. So how do we actually get to it from here? Well, let's go up to the cog icon and let's go to Site Contents. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom, that is where our training team discussion board is. Click on the three dots and go to Settings. And if we click on the first link here, List Name, Description and Navigation, this is where we get that little option to display the discussion board on the quick launch. So I'm going to say yes and click on Save. And now if we go back to home, you can see that the discussion board has been added to the quick launch, and we can simply access it by clicking on it from here. We've mentioned in previous lessons how SharePoint interacts with Microsoft 365 groups. But I just want to go back and just cover this in a bit more detail because this is such an important thing to know. Now, Microsoft 365 groups are another way of creating teams effectively in Microsoft 365. We can create a group from within Outlook, and when we create the group, it's automatically going to create an associated SharePoint site for that group. So let's take a look at what that exactly looks like. So I'm going to go to the app launcher and we're going to open up Outlook. And this is Outlook Online that I'm opening, but it does work the same if you're using Outlook for the desktop. Now, what you'll notice is in your folder list on the left-hand side, right at the bottom, you're going to have this section called Groups. And this is where you can see any Microsoft 365 groups that you've been set up or that you're a member of. Now, notice here we have SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub. So this is the Microsoft 365 group that corresponds with the SharePoint site that we've been working on in this course. But check this out. What we can do is we can create a new Microsoft 365 group, and I'm just going to call this Project Indigo. Now, notice underneath that your Microsoft 365 group is given its own unique email address. So that's going to be made up of whatever you've named this group, followed by your company name. And this is pretty cool because it means that anybody can use this email address, even if they're outside of your organization, to send messages to this group. You can add a description for your group. I'm going to leave mine blank just to save a little bit of time, and then we can adjust our privacy settings for the group. So we have a choice of private or public. If we set this to public, it means that anybody can access this group. If we set it to private, it means that it's private to whichever members we add. And if we click on the edit button just here, this is where we can change those settings. So if it's set to public, anyone in your organization can see the contents of this group. Now I'm going to keep mine on private, and we're going to click on create. So now I can add in members for this group. So I'm going to say that I want to add Adele, let's add Lee, let's add Grady, we'll add Alex, and we'll also add Patty. And click on the add button at the bottom. So now notice in the folder pane I have a brand new Microsoft 365 group called Project Indigo. And if I click on this group, it's going to take me to a group mailbox. You can see at the top there are 6 members, and basically everybody who's a member of this group is going to be able to see this group in their group section in their folder list. So they can see any emails that are coming into the group mailbox. They can send emails to other people from the group. And then of course we have these little icons, go to group files. And if we click on the 3 dots, we have a group notebook, a group plan, a group site, and then we have group settings. So this is where the interaction with SharePoint comes about. Because if we click go to group files, what that's basically going to do is open up the SharePoint document library associated with this new group. Now currently there's nothing in this document library, but notice how it looks exactly the same as when we were working with document libraries from within SharePoint. So I could create a brand new document from here, I could upload a file or a folder or a template, I can edit, I can sync, all of that stuff that we've seen before. So I'm just going to upload a file. Let's just go for business proposal again, click on open, and it's going to upload into the document library. Now if we click back on Project Indigo, just to go back to that main page, if we click the 3 dots and go to site, that's going to jump us across to the SharePoint site that's automatically been created for this Microsoft 365 group. And what we get is a basic site template. And of course we can go in and we can customize this, make it look exactly how we want. And one thing to note here is that if we take a look at the document library, I can see the little web part down here. There is the business proposal that we just uploaded. So everything is feeding through nicely. So just be aware of that. Whenever you create a group in Outlook, it's going to create an associated SharePoint site with a document library. There are many ways that SharePoint also interacts with Microsoft Teams. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at a few of them. So I've simply gone to the App Launcher and I've opened up Microsoft Teams, and I have it in this new tab up here. Now, if you're familiar with Teams, this is all going to look fairly standard. We have the teams that we have access to running down the left-hand side, and then underneath we have team channels. So for example, we have the sales and marketing team, and then we have 3 channels: general, marketing team, and monthly reports. And channels are really there just to direct conversations of the same type. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that over here, I don't have a team set up that relates to the Microsoft 365 Training Hub SharePoint site. So we're going to change that, and we're going to create a team specifically for the members of this SharePoint site. So what we can do here is right at the bottom, we can say join or create a team. We're going to create a team, but we're not going to create it from scratch. We're going to create it from an existing group or team. Because if you recall, our SharePoint site is also associated with a Microsoft 365 group. So we can use the Microsoft 365 group to kind of get a head start. It's going to copy across all of the settings and all of the members for us. So it's showing me all of the Microsoft 365 groups that I have access to. Let's go for this one just here, SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub, and click on Create. So now I'm getting a team created in Microsoft Teams with the same settings and the same members as the SharePoint site. And if you want to double check that, you can now see that we have our new team at the bottom. If we click the 3 dots and go into Manage Team, this is where we're going to be able to see a list of everybody who is a member of this team. So this is going to include everybody who's a member of the SharePoint site. So now that we have this team set up, we can start having conversations. So by default, we get a general channel created for us. Of course, we could create more. I'm not going to go into that because this isn't a Teams training session, but this is where we can come, the post section, to start having conversations. Now, something else we can do here is we can add SharePoint sites or SharePoint pages directly into this channel to make them accessible to all members. So if you take a look at the top here where we have posts, files and notes, we have a little plus symbol. So I'm going to click it and we can simply search for SharePoint. Now you're going to get a result of 2. We can add SharePoint pages or we can add SharePoint. Now I'm just going to go for SharePoint because that lets us add pages as well. And this is where we can select what content we want to make available to everybody in this Teams channel. So it might be that I want specific pages to be displayed, or maybe I want to select one of the lists that I've created, or maybe I want to show one of my SharePoint document libraries. You can choose any of these. You also aren't restricted to just sharing content from within this specific SharePoint site. If you have multiple SharePoint sites and you want to share a page from those, you have a little link here that says add page or list from any SharePoint site. And what that will do is it will just open up this little paste link field, and you can literally go to the page in SharePoint, copy the URL and paste it into here. Now we are going to select something from this particular site. Let's go for a list. Maybe I need everybody to see this list just here, employee skill levels. I'm going to post to the channel about this tab so everybody knows I've created it, and I'm going to click on Save. Now notice what's happened here. We now have a new tab at the top called List Employee Skill Levels, and it's showing that list directly from within Teams. So it means that people don't have to keep diving out into SharePoint if they need to review this list. And of course we can edit this list as well. So if I go to Edit in Grid View, people can come in and they can make changes to this list. Let's click on the plus again. We're going to go for SharePoint one more time, and this time we're going to add a page. So maybe I want everybody to see the news page of this particular SharePoint site. I'm going to select it, click on Save. It's going to create another tab called News, and they can now see the latest news updates from the SharePoint team site. A question that comes up often when I'm training SharePoint is, do I have to keep coming into my SharePoint site to access any of the documents? So for example, we're in our Microsoft 365 Training Hub. If I want to access one of the documents, I can go to the document library. I can, let's say, click on the general folder, and there are all of my files, and then I can open them from here. And of course, I can open them in the browser or in the full version of the application. Now, I understand why people ask this because most people tend to work predominantly from File Explorer. I know that is definitely true in my case. I pretty much open all of my files, no matter where they're stored, from File Explorer. It's just something I've always done and a habit I'm in. And I know that this is the same for a lot of people. Now, the good news is that this is entirely possible because we can synchronize our files from SharePoint to File Explorer. And if you're already a OneDrive user, you might already be familiar with this concept. Now, let's say that I want to synchronize this document library to File Explorer. What I'm going to do is click on it so that we have all of the folders here. And then if you check out the menu running across the top, we have a sync button. So let's click this. It's going to go away and it's going to synchronize all of my files. Now it says here we're connecting OneDrive on your device because effectively SharePoint document libraries are OneDrive libraries. Now at the top here we have a little message. This site is trying to open Microsoft OneDrive. So I'm going to say, okay, yes, open it up. And it's now synchronizing my files. Now I can close this message down and I can actually watch this process happening in File Explorer. So let's jump across there. So I'm in my File Explorer. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, notice here I have MSFT. Now this is the name of my company, and we have this little icon just here which denotes it as a SharePoint library. If I expand, notice what's happened. It's synchronized SMT Microsoft 365 Training Hub documents. And if you're curious about these other two, I already had these synchronized, so they were already in here. So effectively what I've done here is I've just added another folder to my company folder just here. So now when I double click to open this up, I'm going to be able to see all of those folders. If I go into General, there are all of my files, and I can simply double click to open them, and I can start working on my file in exactly the same way. And as you might expect, any changes that you make are automatically saved and synchronized back, so it doesn't matter where you open this file from, be it SharePoint or File Explorer, everything is going to remain synchronized. So that is how you can synchronize your SharePoint files to File Explorer. If you prefer to work in this way, then I highly recommend you give this a go. It's time now to complete exercise 5. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course, where we have looked at how SharePoint integrates with other Microsoft 365 applications. So the first thing I'd like you to do here is create a discussion board for your team site and call it Travel Forum. And I'd like you to make sure that that discussion board is easily accessible either via a link on the home page or from the Quick Launch menu. I'd like you to post a question in the Travel Forum, and that question can be about whatever you like. Now, the next task is optional, and this will very much depend on if you have Microsoft Teams or not. If you do, I'd like you to create a team in Microsoft Teams based off of your SharePoint site. I'd like you to then add a tab in the General channel of the team that displays the SharePoint list customers. And the final thing to do in this exercise is to synchronize your SharePoint files to your PC. And again, this is optional. I know that not everybody wants to have their files synchronized to their PC. But if you do, then please feel free to practice this here. That's it for this exercise. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first part of this exercise was to create a discussion board and call it Travel Forum. Now, to do this, to add the discussion board app, we need to switch into the classic version of SharePoint. Now, we can do that by clicking on the cog and going to Add an App. Now, notice here we have a link to the classic experience. And when we click that, it's going to take us into the correct page. So from here, we can scroll through and I can see that there is the discussion board app. So let's click it to add it in. And we're going to call it Travel Forum and click on Create. The next thing I asked you to do was to add this Travel Forum to either the Quick Launch or set up a link somewhere so it's easily accessible. So we're going to grab the Travel Forum from this list. We're going to click the 3 details and go to List Settings. And from here we can click List Name, Description and Navigation, because this is where we're going to find the little option to display this on the Quick Launch navigation menu. Let's click on Save and then go back to Home. And there it is. There is our Travel Forum. The next thing I asked you to do was simply to post a question in the forum, just to check that you understand how. So I've clicked on the link. Let's go to New Discussion. We're going to enter a subject. And because this is a question, I'm going to check this box just here and click on Save to post that question. And of course, anybody is free to click on this and add their replies. Now, the next part of this exercise was entirely optional, depending on if you have Teams or not. If you do have Teams, I asked you to create a Microsoft team that corresponds with our SharePoint travel site. So let's open up Teams and we're going to say join or create a team. Let's go for create a team. And we're going to choose from a group or team. Now I'm going to say Microsoft 365 group, there is Contoso Travel. So let's click this, let's click on create, it's going to go away and it's going to create that team in Microsoft Teams based off of that SharePoint site. So now that we have Contoso Travel in our Teams list, you can see that we have a general channel. And the next part of this exercise was to create a tab at the top which shows the customer list that we saved into SharePoint. So we can click the plus at the top to add a new tab. We're going to search for SharePoint. Let's select it. And notice Contoso Travel is selected by default. So because I want to upload a list into Teams, I can go to the List tab and there is my customers list. Let's select it, click on Save, and that will load into a brand new tab in this channel in Teams. The final thing I asked you to do as part of this exercise, and again, this step was entirely optional because it might be that you don't want to actually do this, is I wanted you to make sure that you know how to synchronize your SharePoint files to your PC so that you can access them through File Explorer. So if we go to the document library where we have our files, if you do want to synchronize this to your PC, all you would need to do is click on the Sync button. That will synchronize your files, and you'll be able to access them through File Explorer. That is it for this exercise. I will see you in the next section. In this section of the course, we're going to start to take a look at workflows. And we're going to begin by taking a look at a very simple approval workflow. Now, if you're not sure what I mean by workflow, workflows are something that you can create in SharePoint to automate a process. And we can harness the power of another Microsoft 365 application called Power Automate in order to do this. So let's take a look at our first example. Now, if you take a look at this file just here, I'm just working in the general folder in the document library, where we have copy for website. If we scroll across, notice that we have a brand new column that's been added in here. And that column is called sign off status. And you can see that next to this particular file, we have the word pending. Now, sign off status is an inbuilt workflow in SharePoint. So what this essentially is this document has been submitted to another member of staff for approval. So effectively it's been sent down an approval workflow. So maybe my manager Alex needs to approve the copy for the website before we upload it. So I've created an approval workflow which notifies Alex that his attention is required, and then once he's checked the document, if he's happy with it, he can approve this document. Now currently, because we have pending in the sign-off column, this document is at the stage where it's waiting for Alex to review the document. As soon as he approves it, this sign-off status will change to approved. So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at this in more detail so you can start creating your own approval workflows. Now, I have a file a bit further down called Leave Request Form. So maybe this is a form that other members of staff fill in if they want to take some leave. And it might be that I've completed this form and I now need to send this through to my boss Adele for approval. So what I can effectively do is do all of that within SharePoint. And the beauty of this is it means that we're not emailing documents backwards and forwards, and everybody can always see via this sign-off status column exactly what stage of the workflow this is at. So it means that if Adele is being a bit slow in approving, I don't have to keep calling her up or sending her an email, check in to see if she got the form or if she's responded to it, because I can just come in here and see the status in this column. So let's select this file just here. We're going to go up to the three dots at the top and we're going to go to Automate and Request Sign Off. Now what this will do is it will open up this pane on the right hand side called Run Flow. And it says this flow lets you send an item to others to get their approval. Any one of the approvers can approve. You can track the status for this request using the sign off status column. So we can add one or more approvers in here, and it's just going to take one of them to approve it for this whole flow to be approved. So I'm just going to send this to my manager, Adele. I'm going to leave her a little message, and I'm going to click Run Flow at the bottom. Now notice that in the sign off status column, I now have pending next to the leave request form. So this is currently waiting for Adele to either approve or reject my request. So I've jumped across to Adele's account and I've opened up her Outlook. And notice at the top here, she has an email saying, please approve the leave request form for Deb Ashby. So she can click on the link to view the leave request, and then she can choose to approve or reject. So we're going to approve the leave request. You can see it now says approved, and I've got a notification come in saying final status approved. So when I now go back to SharePoint and take a look at this leave request form and scroll across, I can see that the sign-off status is now showing as approved as opposed to pending. So that's how you can very simply create a quick approval flow to get somebody else to sign off on a document. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can create an automated approval workflow. And the approval workflow is a standard template that's set up in SharePoint. But did you know that we have lots of other workflows that we can create by harnessing the power of another Microsoft 365 application called Power Automate? Now, it's worth noting that Power Automate, which you can access from the app launcher, it's this little thing just here. This is a paid-for application. So if you want to start really getting into automating lots of tedious daily tasks, then you might want to research this a little bit further and decide if you want to purchase a subscription. Now, this training course isn't a Power Automate training course, but I just wanted to take this lesson to briefly introduce you to some of the potential of this application when you're working with SharePoint. So if we go back to our SharePoint team site, I'm going to jump into pages. So from here, I can see all of the pages that make up my team site. And we have 4 of them just here. Now, maybe I want to set up a workflow to add one of these pages into my Outlook task list. So maybe I kind of need to remind myself to update certain pages. Instead of going into Outlook and creating a task for this, I can get effectively Power Automate to do that for me. So let's say that we need to remind ourselves to update the Learning Team Home page. I'm going to select the page. Let's click on the 3 dots. We're going to go to Automate, Power Automate, and notice here we can choose to create a new flow. We can see any flows we have set up, or we can configure page approval flow. So we're going to create a new flow. Notice the pane that opens up on the left-hand side. We've got a lot more options in here than when we did the approval workflow in the last lesson. And these are all coming directly from the Power Automate application. Now, I have a few popular ones listed here. I can click Show More to see more of them. But basically what we can do here is take a look through the list and use one of these templates to set up a flow. Now, of course, once you get into learning more about Power Automate, you'll know that you can basically create your own custom flows from scratch. But in this example, I'm just going to show you a template that's already set up. Now, you'll see here there's lots of different things that we can do. And as I mentioned, what I want to do here is I want to be able to run this flow and have it add a task into Outlook to remind me to update this page. So if I scroll down, I can see I have a little template here called Add an Outlook Task for a selected file. So that sounds about right. Let's select it. Now, what you'll see on this page are the applications that Power Automate needs to connect to in order to run this flow successfully. So for me, it needs access to SharePoint and it needs access to my Outlook task list. And the thing you need to check on this page is that you have a green tick next to both of these down the bottom. You can see I've got green ticks and it's showing my email address. So it's basically telling me that I'm signed in so this flow can run correctly. If you don't see a green tick there and instead you see something like sign in, it means you're going to need to click that and sign into the application. So once you have a valid connection just here, you can then choose create flow, and that's pretty much it. So we've created what we call an instant flow, and you can see the type there is showing as instant. Now, there are 2 types of flow you can create. You can create an instant flow and you can create a scheduled flow. Now, the difference between the 2 is that an instant flow is manual. So it's not going to run until you click on a button to tell it to run. Whereas with a scheduled flow, that is a flow that will run on a specific date and time, depending on how you've scheduled it. Now, I don't want this to be a scheduled flow. I want to be able to select a file in SharePoint and choose if I want to run this flow. So now that we have this set up, if we jump back to SharePoint, all I would need to do here to add this into my Outlook tasks is to click on the 3 dots again, go to Automate, and check out what we have. It's now showing me add an Outlook task for a selected file. So I can click this. It's going to open up the Run Now pane on the right hand side. I can see that I'm signed in. That's fine. Let's click on Continue. And now it's asking me to enter in a task subject. So I'm going to say update this page, and then we can choose an importance. I'm going to put that as normal, and I can choose run flow. So now that flow is going away and it's creating a task in my Outlook that's going to remind me to update this page. So let's jump across to Outlook and check to make sure that's worked. And I can see if I glance across to my task list that I have displayed in a little pane on the right hand side, I have a task just here, update this page. Now, once you've run the flow once, you'll be able to see that in the 28-day run history. So if we now look at this page, you can see the date and time that I ran it, the duration, and what the status is. So I can see that the flow has run successfully. So that is kind of the basis of how Power Automate works, and just a quick example of one of the many things you can use it for when you're working in SharePoint. As I said, this isn't a full-on Power Automate training course, but if this looks like something that you might want to use and you think would be useful, I definitely recommend that you take a bit more of a look at this application. It's time now to do exercise 6. And in this exercise, we're going to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course on workflows. So I'd like you to set up an approval workflow for any of the documents in the document library. And I'd like you to just ensure that you add the word test into the subject line. I'd then like you to choose someone in your organization to approve the workflow. And that's why it's really important to add the word test so that they know that this isn't real and you're just training. That is it. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So for this, we're going to work in the Documents document library, and we're going to choose one of the documents in the Travel Documents folder to send through an approval workflow. So let's say that we need to sign off on the latest price list. So we're going to choose this file just here. We're going to click the 3 dots. We're going to go to Automate, and we're going to say Request Sign Off. The first thing we need to do here is make sure that we have a green tick next to each of the applications that this flow requires, which I do. If you see sign in just here, just click that link and enter in your credentials. Let's click on create flow. And now we can choose who is going to approve this flow. So I'm going to say that Adele is going to approve mine, and this is where I asked you to add the word test. Please approve the updated price list. All we then need to do is click on Run Flow. That's going to go away. And when we refresh our browser, we should find that this is now in pending status in the sign off status column. As soon as Adele approves this, and we saw how to do that in the lesson, that sign off status is going to change to approved. That's all I need you to do. I'll see you in the next section. In this section of the course, we're going to start to delve into some of the design aspects of our team sites. Because at the end of the day, we want to make our team sites look as seamless and as engaging as possible. And a lot of the time, we'll want them to take on the properties of maybe our own company branding or our own intranet site. So knowing some tips and tricks as to how to modify the design is going to be beneficial. And we're simply going to start out in this lesson by how we can change the overall theme and other items. And we did briefly touch on some of this in a previous lesson, but it's now time to delve a bit deeper into it. So we're going to be working in our Microsoft 365 Training Hub team site, and at the moment I haven't really done a great deal of customization to this. Obviously we have added items into the quick launch, the left-hand navigation. We've added a couple of news posts, and I changed the header color and uploaded an image as the logo. So we've done some minor customizations, but we can take this a lot further. Now, when you're thinking about the overall look and feel of your team site, those settings are controlled underneath the cog icon. We can go into change the look. And in here, we have 3 different things that we can change: theme, header, and navigation. So if we click on theme, this is where we can go in and we can select a different SharePoint theme. Now, currently I have this red one selected, but I could change this to teal. I think I like that a little bit better, but also notice that underneath we have a customize button. So this is where we can go in and we can be a bit more specific about the color that we want to use as the main color for our site and what we want to use as the accent color. If we don't customize, we're kind of stuck with these presets in here. So again, we're going to choose teal. Let's go to customize, and maybe I want the header to be a dark blue and I want the accent to be a light blue. Let's click on Save. Now, if we go back into Change the Look, we can then customize the header. Currently, I have mine set to compact, but we could choose minimal, which makes it a lot smaller. We could go for standard, or we could go for extended. So this really depends on how much space you want this header to take up. Now I'm going to leave mine on extended for a moment. I might decide to change that a bit later on. We can then choose a theme for our font. So currently I have this dark blue background with white font. You can see that in the header, but I could choose this just here, which removes that background. I could have a light grey background, or I could have a light blue background. Now I think I like the dark blue. And of course, we could even choose to use an image in our header. This is optional, you don't have to do that, but if you want a nice image running across all the way where we have this blue, you could upload one. When it comes to the display, we can choose if we want to have the site title visible. So I have mine on. If I toggle this off, the site title goes away. Now I can't actually think of an instance where that would be useful. I always like to have mine toggled on. And of course, then we have our site logo thumbnail and our site logo, and these I uploaded in a previous lesson. And then we can choose how our logo is aligned right at the bottom, so we can align it to the left, the center, or the right. So if I put it in the center, it's going to look like that. I could put it over on that side. I think it looks best over on the left. Let's click on Save. And then the final thing that we have in here is the navigation. Now we can choose if we want our site navigation, and we're talking about the quick launch pane, visible or not. If I turn this off, we get rid of it. If I turn it back on, it comes back again. Now I have mine showing in vertical orientation, so it's running down the left-hand side of my page. But what is sometimes quite nice is to have this horizontally running across the top. And I actually think this looks really nice in combination with the extended header layout. Because with this layout, you get this blue line, and then the menu kind of sits really nicely underneath. So I think that looks pretty good. So that is how you change those three main elements. Another thing that's worth noting in this pane is if you look all the way down at the bottom, we have a little link here that says Classic Change the Look options. If you recall, we're sort of working in the modern version of SharePoint, but there is an older classic version as well. Now we do have some more customization options when it comes to the theme in the classic version. So if we click on this link, let's just take a look at what we have in there, and then I'll leave it to you to decide if you want to use this. So in here we have some templates that we can apply. And these templates include color schemes, they include backgrounds, they include accent colors, and they also include fonts. So if you scroll through here and you like the look of any of these and want to apply them to your site, and these are generally a bit quicker because it means that you don't have to customize all of the individual elements. You can simply select one. Let's just go for this one, Immerse. You can see here the color palette that's in use. You could modify that to something else. You can see the site layout. So we have a couple of different ways that we can modify the layout. We have Oslo selected, but Seattle is just a slightly different style of layout. You can see the difference as I move between them. The main difference between these two is that with Seattle we have the quick launch menu on the left hand side, whereas with Oslo it's running horizontally across the top. And we can also specify what fonts we want to use for the entire site. So we have a few more customizable items in here. If you want to see what this is going to look like when it's applied to your site, you can click on Try It Out. And that will give you a quick preview as to what this is going to look like when you apply this template. And you can choose to select No, not quite there to remove the layout, or Yes, keep it. And that gives us a completely different look and feel. If I click on Pages, you can see that we have that kind of nice background just showing through there. So this instantly makes our site look a little bit more interesting simply by applying an inbuilt theme. So don't forget about all of these options when it comes to changing the main design elements of your SharePoint team. Another really important aspect when it comes to the design of your SharePoint team site is knowing how to customize the quick launch menu. Now, if you recall, in the last lesson, we changed the layout of our quick launch from running vertically down the page, down the left-hand side, to running horizontally underneath the heading. And I really like the way that this looks. Now, remember, with this quick launch, if you do have it running horizontal, if there isn't enough space for all of the menu items, click the three dots and you'll see everything else that you have in that list. Now, there are a couple of additional things that you can do with this navigation menu. For example, at the moment, if I take a look at this, I can see that I have a couple of document libraries effectively. We have a document library and an image library. And I also have quite a few lists. I've got a list there, one there, and if I click the three dots, I have 3 more lists underneath here. Now, it's going to be a lot more economical when it comes to space. Now, it's going to be a lot more logical if I organize this navigation menu in a slightly different way. So instead of having document library and image library, maybe I want image library to be accessible under a drop down underneath document library. The same thing with these lists. Maybe on this menu, I just want it to say lists and then have a drop down that contains all of the lists that I've created. So how do we make these changes to the quick launch? Well, we need to start by clicking the edit button to the right. That's going to open up the navigation menu on the left hand side. And from here, this is where we can start to make our changes. So the first change that's really simple to make is where we have our document library and our image library, I want the image library to be in a drop-down menu underneath document library. So all we need to do is make sure that the image library is directly underneath the document library, which it is. Click the 3 dots and choose Make Sublink. Because now if I save this at the bottom, notice what happens. Next to document library, I now have a drop down arrow. And when I click it, there is the link to the image library. So that is a really simple way to make drop down lists in your navigation menu. Let's click on Edit again. Because this time I want to create effectively a label that says lists, and then I want to have all of these lists in a drop down menu underneath. Now notice as I'm hovering my mouse over some of these items, I'm getting this little plus pop up. And this tells me that I can add a link or a label to the navigation. So if I click this, where it says choose an option, I don't want to add a link, I want to add a label. And the display name is going to be lists. Now I can choose if I want to have that open in a new tab. I'm not going to. Let's just click on OK, and you can see there it is. So now I can drag this up, and I'm going to put it above the first list, and then I'm going to make all of my lists underneath sublinks of lists. So we're going to go through these one at a time. We're going to say make sublink for all of these lists. Like so. Let's click on Save. And check it out. I can see that my navigation is looking so much neater. Now I just have lists, and when I click the drop down, I then have access to all of my different lists. So I highly recommend you take a look at this, take a look at the items you have in your navigation, and create drop downs where necessary, because it's just going to make your quick launch area look a lot more organized. So the design of our site is really starting to come together, but there's still a few more changes that you can make to really customize the look and feel. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we can add things like sections, and we're going to introduce the concept of web parts. So let's talk about sections first of all. Now, currently I have a very dark black background on my web page, and I think this makes it a little bit harder for you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm actually going to change this to a white background. So let's click on the cog. I'm going to go to change the look and theme, and let's just use a different color. I think I'm going to go for, let's go for a blue, try and keep it the same. That will do nicely. Let's customize it, and let's just click on save. So I think now that makes things a little bit easier to see. Now I'm currently on the home page, and one thing you need to remember about the home page of your team site is that the home page is where we can see snippets of effectively other pages. For example, this news area just here, we have 2 pieces of news, and this first piece of news links through to an external site. It goes to the Microsoft support site, whereas the other news post that I created links through to an actual page within SharePoint. And we designed this page a bit earlier on in the course. So with most things on this home page, what you see on here are links to other things. For example, the document library. We get a little snippet of what that document library looks like. Full document library, I can go to document library on the menu, and I'm going to get the full size version of that document library. Now, I've been referring to these things as snippets so far. What they actually are web parts. And each web part is in itself editable. So if we click on the edit link all the way over on the right hand side, this is going to allow us to make edits and changes to not only the web parts, but the page in general. And notice as I hover my mouse over this, if I click on this, I get a little floating menu that allows me to do certain things. For example, I can change the layout options. So if I were to select list from here, it's going to display the news items in a different way. I could go for side by side. I could go for hub news. I could go for carousel, which means I need to click on these arrows to move between my posts. Or I could go for tiles. So this is really again down to personal preference. I'm going to do side by side because it takes up a little bit less room. Notice we can delete the web part entirely if we need to. We can duplicate it, we can edit it, or we can move it. So if I wanted to move this below the activity area, I could click and I could drag and I can drop it somewhere underneath here. So I could put it right at the bottom if I wanted to and have all of my activity at the top. Now, I don't particularly like that, so I'm going to click the undo button to put it back. But just be aware that you can very easily move web parts around. Now, if I was to click on the edit button, this is going to allow me to edit the web part. And notice we get a pane open up on the right hand side with all of the different editing options for this particular web part. So I can change the news source, I can change the layout, those are some of the options that we saw in the floating menu. I can change how many news posts I'm showing on this homepage. Now, we only created 2, which is why I'm only displaying 2, but I actually have this set to 4. So if I were to add more news posts in here, it's going to actually show 4 on this start page. I can turn on number of views so we can see that underneath each of the links. I can choose if I want to show who the author of the post is, or if I want to show when it was published. I could also choose to hide this web part if there is nothing to show. We can do things like apply filters. So if I only want to include news items that match a certain keyword, I could choose that here and it will filter out everything else. So lots of different things that we can customize for each of these web parts. Now, you're going to get different options depending on which web part you're clicked on. If I was to now go and click on the quick links web part over here, I get different choices in this drop down. So I could choose film strip here, I could go for grid, I could go for button, or I could go for list, which is what we had, or tiles. So if I was to stick with tiles, I could then go in, edit the web part, and I can make further customizations. So I can choose the icon size. Do I want it to be small, medium, large, extra large? Do I want it to fill the space? What is it that I want? I'm going to go with small. I can choose if I want to show only the icon or image. Well, I'm going to turn that off so that we can see the text underneath. And currently I haven't customized either of these quick links, so I still have just the templated buttons in here. But what I could do is click on this first one, choose edit, and then if I have a specific link that I want this quick link to jump to, this is where I can change it. So maybe I want this link just to go to Google. I can choose link from up here. Let's click on change, and I could choose from a link. Control V to paste it in. Let's click on add, and that link will now jump to Google. I can then choose how I want my thumbnail to look. So I could go for custom image, and I could upload my own image. Now, because this link is going to Google, I would probably put Google's logo just here, but just so we don't get into any copyright issues, I'm going to upload a different image. So let's click on change. I'm going to go to upload, and I have an image saved off here of a web. See what I did there? Let's click on open and choose add image. So that's going to upload, and it's going to show on that little tile. Now, I'm not sure if I love the way that that looks. It's pretty small. So let's revisit our layout options. If I go to compact, yeah, you can see it a bit better just there. What about film strip? Yeah, we can see it better there. So I can go in and customize how I want this to look. So let's just go for compact. And the title here, we're going to change to Google. And that is it. We have customized the quick link. Now let's also add a link to our discussion board up here and make that a quick link. Now if you click on the pencil icon and click on change at the top, this is where you can add in a link to whatever you like. But what you'll find is that if you go to Site, which should theoretically allow you to select anything that you have in SharePoint, sometimes I'll find that I can't actually find within any of these folders what I want to link through to. So for example, the discussion board, I can't see that in any of these folders. Now, if you're having problems like that, what you can do is just cancel out of here. I'm going to click Save as Draft to save my changes. And then we can actually go to the Training Team discussion board from the navigation menu and simply copy the URL at the top, Control C. So now when we go back and edit our pages and click on this web part just here and click Edit, when I click on change, I can now add it in from the link. Control V to paste and click on add. So really simple to do if you can't actually find it natively within your SharePoint site. So let's change this title to Join the Discussion. Once again, I'm going to use a custom image and I'm going to upload one that I have saved off. Incidentally, both of the files that I've used to customize these icons are available in the course files folder if you'd like to use them too. So let's go to upload. And this is the image that we're going to use for the discussion board. Let's click on add image. And there we go. I can close down quick links. So we've seen there what web parts are and how we can make some basic customizations. Notice that when you do start to make changes to your page, those changes don't become live until you publish the page. So at this stage, I have two options. If I want to maybe come back to this later without publishing my changes so far, I could choose to save this as a draft. Alternatively, if I want to make these changes live, I have a republish button in the top right-hand corner. That's going to publish those changes and update on the actual site. In the previous lesson, we started to take a look at how we can make changes to web parts. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about sections. Now, each page in your SharePoint team site is divided down into different sections. So let's click on the edit button again on the right hand side to put us into edit mode. So we've got web parts. We can see those very clearly when we hover over the different elements on our page. But this is also split down into sections. Now notice all the way over on the left hand side, we have this little blue plus. And if we hover our mouse over it, it says add a new section. So if I wanted to add another section to this page to display different information, I can click on the plus and then I get to headings, sections and templates. So if we look at sections, I could add a 1-column section, a 2-column section, 3 columns, and I can have different layouts. Alternatively, if we go to templates, I could choose to have a section that kind of looks like this. So we have 3 columns in this section, placeholders for 3 images and placeholders for 3 lots of text. So it really depends what you want to add to your page and how you want it to look. Now I'm going to add this one here, 3-column image and text. And that's exactly what I get. I get a new section at the top of the page and I have placeholders for images and text. Now, it might be that I don't necessarily want to have this as the first thing on my page, but remember, you can always move any section you like at any time. Now, notice here when I click on the first image, we get a floating toolbar with lots of different options. So again, we can edit the web part, we can duplicate it and delete it. That is pretty standard. But then we get image specific options as well. So we can upload images from here. We can use a text overlay, which I'll show you that in a moment because that's a really nice effect. We can resize the image, we can crop it, we can align it, so on and so forth. So let's say that I want to have images here to represent the different services that we offer, the different ways that we deliver training. So I'm going to choose Browse Images from the floating menu bar. I'm going to go to Upload and I'm going to select this image here, Live Events. Let's click on Open and add the image. And I'm going to do exactly the same for all of these. So let's browse for images. Let's upload. And we're going to choose online learning and click on open and add the image. And then the final one, let's click on Browse Images, Upload, and this time we're going to choose Webinars and click on Open. Let's add the image. So very quickly I've been able to add these images and I think they look really nice. Now if we click back on the first image, notice that we have a text overlay button in this little floating menu bar. Now if we click this, it allows us to add this little piece of text overlaid really nicely on the image, and I think this looks really professional and slick. So I'm going to click on Edit and I can now make changes to the color of this text box, the text options. I can change the size of the font that's in use. So I want to make that a bit smaller. I can take it down to 16 or take it up to 20. If I want to change the text box color, I could make it purple or blue. I'm going to stick with black. So lots of different customizations we can make. So from here, I'm going to actually edit this text so that it says live training events. And I'm going to do the same for all of these. We're going to add a text overlay. This one is online learning. And then finally, let's add a text overlay. This one is live webinars. And I think you'll agree that these look really nice. And because the layout that we added was images and text, if I hover down the bottom here, you can see I have a little block where I can just start to add some text and give a bit more information about these live training events. So I'm just going to say, join us on one of our weekly live training events. And of course, we have another little toolbar which will allow us to format this text as well. So maybe I want to make the text a little bit smaller. Let's take that down to 14. I can also change the text style and also change the font color. So lots of different customizations we can do. One of the main points to take away here is that with every one of these elements, you get a unique floating toolbar with different customization options. Now, just for quickness sake, I've gone in and I've added some sample text to each of these boxes. Because notice, if we select the text, and click the three dots on the end of this floating toolbar, we get a whole heap of other choices in here as well. So we can add highlight colors, we can change the alignment, we can even add things like bulleted lists, tables, images, strike through, all of that good stuff. So I'm going to choose center to make this the same as all of the others. Now I've added this section in, but I don't particularly want it to be the first thing that people see when they come to this page. So what we can do with sections is that once we've created them, if we take a look over on the left hand side, we've got a move section option. So if I click this, I can literally pick this up and I can place it wherever I want it to be. So maybe I want to put it down here. Let's republish the page and take a look at it. So now we have news at the top, then we have activity, and then right at the bottom we have our new section with our 3 different images and text. Now currently, if I was just to click on any of these, they just open up a larger preview of the image. What I actually want these to do is link through to other pages. So what I would need to do is build 3 pages, one for live training events, one for online learning, and one for live webinars. And then we can link through. So that's what we're going to do in the next section. I'm going to show you how to create 3 pages, and then we're going to link these through. The final thing I just want to do very quickly in this lesson is, if you recall, in the previous lesson we added a quick link up here to join the discussion, and this takes us through to the training team discussion board. So now that I have this under quick links, I don't want to have it in the navigation menu at the top here because I'm just doubling up and it's taking up space. So what I can do is click on Edit, and then at the bottom here where we have Training Team Discussion Board, I'm simply going to click the 3 dots, choose Remove, click on Save, and now my quick launch looks a lot cleaner. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can add a new section to a page in our SharePoint team site and how we can customize it. And we added in these 3 images, we added some overlay text, and we added some information under each of these images. Now, as I mentioned, currently when we click on any of these images, we don't really go anywhere. It just opens up a preview of the actual image that we've used. Instead, I want each one of these to go to its own individual page within the SharePoint site that contains more information about each of these topics. So the first thing we need to do here is we need to create the 3 pages. And this process that I'm going to show you applies to any page that you want to create in your SharePoint site. So notice if we take a look at our horizontal menu bar, we have a Pages link. So I'm going to jump into that, and it's basically going to take me into the Site Pages library so I can see all of the pages that currently make up my SharePoint site. Now what we can do here is click the new drop down, and you can see that we have different types of pages that we can create. We can create wiki pages, we can create web part pages, we can create a site page or a link. Now a wiki page is kind of like a general page that you could use for information. A web part page, if we click on this, this is going to allow us to start from a template. So if you just don't want to be presented with a blank page that you then have to design by adding different elements, you could choose to use one of these different layouts. And you can see as I'm clicking through them, we get a little preview on the left-hand side. Now this is fine, you can create your page this way, but what you'll find is that when you choose to do this using the new web part page link, you're going to be working predominantly in the classic view in classic SharePoint. And for me personally, I find classic SharePoint a little bit more difficult to work with. So let's take a look at an alternative. I'm just going to click back on my browser to go back to my main pages area. This time we're going to go to new, and I'm just going to say create a new site page. So when we select this method, we're now working in the more modern version of SharePoint. And this is kind of what we've been working with up until this point, so it should look a little bit more familiar. So we have our new page, and I can go in and start to make some changes. So I'm going to give my page a title. Let's call this Live Training. We have some layout options, so I can choose plain. We can go for color block. That's a completely different look and feel. We can go for overlap, so on and so forth. And of course, we can change the background of this header. Now, I've just downloaded 3 pattern backgrounds, and I would recommend that you are a little bit careful about the images that you use in this header area. For example, if I go to Browse Images, and I'm just going to upload an image that I have saved off. Let's choose this one just here for live events. When I upload it and click Add Image, because you don't get to see the whole image, it's kind of pretty much cut off most of this image. Now I can drag to set the focal point, but a lot of the time that doesn't work too well. It's not too bad if you want to move from side to side, but up and down is pretty much a no-no. So for me, this image isn't really working too well. What I find much better is to just add something like a pattern. So I've downloaded 3 backgrounds from pexels.com. Let's just upload them. So I'm going to go with pattern 1 first of all. Let's click on open and add the image, and that's going to add it to the header. So that looks a lot better than just having a photo that's mostly cut off. And then once we've done our header, we can then move into adding our content. And you'll notice that by default, comments are part of every page, and we can choose if we want to allow people to comment on the page or if we want to disable it. Notice on the left hand side we have a plus, which is going to allow us to add a new section, and we're getting those different templates again. So if I want to go in and then add, let's say, 1 column image and text, I can select that. It opens up a new section and I can go in and start making my edits. And by this stage, we've seen enough of these floating toolbars and we've added different types of content such as images and text that we now know exactly what we're looking at just here. So I'm just going to undo that. We're just going to have the heading on this page. This is kind of like a test page for us anyway. So effectively, that is how you can create a page. That is how you can add content, and you can then go in adding images and text to build up your page. Now what I'm going to do is off camera, I'm going to add 2 more pages in exactly the same way. I'm going to use pattern 2 and pattern 3 that are saved off in the course files folder as the header image. And then we're going to take a look in the next lesson at how we can link them through to our images on our team site start page. In the previous lesson, I showed you how you can create a site page. Here it is just here. And we saw how we can add a header image and how we can use a template to information. Notice at the bottom, I ended up turning comments on so that people can have a discussion on. Now off camera, I went in and I created 2 more pages that were very similar. So if we go back to the pages link, notice we now have webinars and online learning. Now, a really quick way to copy pages where you want to basically have the same template, you just want to switch out the images and the text, is to simply create one page, click on the three dots, and then choose Copy To. That's going to make a copy of the file. For example, if I were to copy this file, it would be called Live Training 1, and then you can simply rename the file, open it up, and go in and switch out the images. And that's basically what I did for these other two pages, Webinars and Online Learning. So if we take a look at Webinars, you'll see that it has exactly the same structure as the previous page. I just changed the title. I've actually kept the image the same, but you could switch out that image. I've changed the overlay text, so on and so forth. So that's a really nice quick way of creating multiple pages of similar type. So I've basically gone in, created 3 pages. Let's just take a look at the last one for Online Learning. And now that I have these pages, I'm going to want to make them easy to link to. Because currently these pages just kind of exist there in the background. We don't have them added into our navigation menu, and we don't have them linked from anywhere else. So if we wanted to add these pages into the navigation menu, the first thing we would need to do, link. I'm going to say copy, and then we can edit this menu. Now, when we click on the plus, we can choose to add a link, and I simply paste this in. So this first one, I want the display name to be Live Training, and I'm going to say open in a new tab. Let's click on OK. So now we have the live training page just there. Now I'm going to do exactly the same for the other 2 pages. So now I have my 3 pages at the bottom here. What I actually want is to have those in a drop-down list underneath my Pages link in the navigation menu. So all I need to do is drag these up so that they're directly under where we have Pages. And as we've seen before, we just need to click the 3 dots and make them sublinks of that main page. Let's save our navigation menu and check out what we now have. If I click the drop down, I can jump directly to the live training page. It's going to open in a new tab because that's what I set it to do. And that makes the whole process of accessing this a lot easier. So that's how you can add any new pages you create into that main menu. Now let's go back to the home page, because if you remember, we also have a section in here that we need to link through to those pages. So the first thing I need to do here is make sure that I have the URL of each of these pages saved to the clipboard. So if I go to Pages, let's go to Live Training. I'm going to copy the URL, Control C, then we can go back and we can edit the page. Let's click on the web part and choose Edit Web Part, because this is going to open up this pane on the right hand side, and we can simply add in the link, Control V. Now notice there's no save button here, which feels a little bit weird, but when we republish the page, we should find now that if we click on this image, it's going to link through to the correct page in SharePoint, which it does. So I would repeat that process and do exactly the same for the other pages. I'd go to the Webinars page, I'd grab the URL, Control C, I would then go back to the home page and edit it, and then edit the web part and paste that link in, Control V, close and republish. So those are a couple of ways that you can start linking pages through to make them easily accessible for anybody looking at your SharePoint team site. So far throughout this section, we've pretty much been looking at how we can add images, text and links to our pages and to our home page. But I just want to let you know that there are so many types of other content that we can add to our pages to really make them come alive. And that's what I want to run through very briefly in this section, and then I'll leave you to explore some of the options that you have. Now, I'm currently on the home page. Let's click on the edit link to put us into edit mode, because what you'll notice is that if we scroll all the way down, and you'll find this at the bottom of every section, you have a little plus symbol in the middle here. And notice as I hover over it, it says add a new web part in column 1. So by clicking this plus, we're not adding a new section. If we wanted to add a new section, we would need to click the plus that you can see over on the left hand side. But if we click this plus, it's going to pop open a menu of all different types of content that we can add to the start page. You can see here they are divided down into different categories, so it depends what you want to add. Maybe I want to add a text block or an image or a quick links panel like we have at the top. Maybe I want to add another news web part or an area that displays people and their profiles. So let's select this one. Notice it adds that web part at the bottom, and I can choose to maybe showcase some staff members. So I'm just going to add myself into here, and let's also add in Adele. In fact, let's add a few. Let's go for Lee, and we'll also add Lynn. So maybe these are key members of staff that you want to highlight. Click on Republish in the top corner, and we've very quickly managed to add in those key people. Of course, we could go back in and edit this page and maybe add some more text in between to explain who these people are. But if I hover over and click the plus in the middle again, notice some other things that we have in here. We can add buttons to our page. So this will be a clickable button with a custom label and a link. So if you want a nice button, much like you see on many websites, for example, the Republish button in the top right-hand corner, that is an example of a clickable button. If you want something that looks like that, you can add that using this little option. We can have call to action buttons. We can even add in dividers. So if I add a divider and republish, that just allows me to add something which provides a little bit of separation between different sections. So I've got it running across the bottom. If I click on edit again, it might be quite nice if I add one underneath the section above. And because this is a 3-column web part, I need to add the divider on all 3 of these web parts. So let's click plus and add a divider for each of them. Click on Republish, and you can see just that little touch there really takes your page to the next level. It's starting to look like a really modern web page. Let's edit again and see what else we have in that web parts menu. We can add what we call a hero web part, and that's just a web part that prominently displays up to 5 pieces of content. We can add an image, we can add galleries, links, quick links, spaces, text, so on and so forth. We can even add YouTube videos, and that's exactly what we're going to do in a moment. But check this out, we can also add things like document libraries, lists, list properties. We can display our recent documents, sites, and we can even link through to our company Twitter account if we wanted to, and display the latest tweets on that first page. So as you can see, as you scroll through, there are so many different types of things that you can add into your SharePoint team pages. And we definitely don't have enough time to go through them all, so I highly recommend that you do have a little play around with this. It is worth noting that underneath the advanced section, we can add links to third-party applications as well. So we could link out to Asana, or maybe Trello or Salesforce. So the potential here is enormous. Now we're just going to finish off by adding a YouTube video, but I'm not going to add it to this homepage. Let's click on Republish, because I'm going to add it into one of my site pages. So let's go to pages and we'll go to online learning, because this is where I might want to have a list of YouTube videos that can help people with their Excel training. So let's edit this page instead. We're going to scroll down to the bottom, click on the plus, and we're going to add a link to YouTube. So we now get this pane on the right hand side, and we simply need to copy the YouTube link and paste it into here. Now I already have this copied to the clipboard, so I just need to do Control V, and this is just a link to the Simon Says It video on Ultimate Excel. Let's close this down, republish, and there you can see we have that video showing. And if you're looking at this thinking, well, that video looks absolutely huge, it's taking up the entire width, I would agree that this doesn't particularly look the best when it comes to viewing a video. But remember, I've just added this into a section that only has 1 column. What I could do is edit the page, and before I add this YouTube video in, so let's actually delete this out, I could add a new section, and I could choose maybe 2 columns or 3 columns instead. So if I choose a 2-column layout, when I add in my web part for YouTube, and let's paste that link in again, it's going to be a lot smaller because it's contained within 1 column. And I could then add another YouTube video in the other side of this web part. So just think about that when you're adding web parts and sections, because things like this can make a huge difference to the readability of your site and your pages. It's time now to do exercise 7. And in exercise 7, we're going to get an opportunity to practice some of the skills that we've learned in this section of the course. And this section was all about site design. Now, this is a bit of an open exercise. I don't really mind what you do here. There aren't too many rules. I'd just like you to practice thoroughly redesigning the Contoso travel site. And that can involve any number of things. So I've just listed out some things to think about, some things that you might want to add. So you could think about adding some pages. Maybe you want to create a news page and add a link to that from the home page. You could add links to other pages and external sites. You could modify the quick links area. You could, of course, change the look and feel by modifying the theme. We can think about adding new web parts to our pages and customizing the current web parts in use. We can add sections and even organize the quick launch navigation. So those are just a few ideas of things that you could potentially do. So I'm going to leave this one up to you to really have a good old play around. I am going to demo a few of these things, so if you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So let's take a look at a few of the things that we could do to make this site look a little bit more interesting. And I think I'm going to start out here by applying a theme. So I'm going to go up to the cog icon. Let's go to change the look. We're going to go to theme, and I think possibly we're going to change this to, let's go for an orange color instead, and click on save. Now, it doesn't look like it's done a great deal because we do need to turn on our header. So let's go for standard, or we could go for extended. And I could choose to have the orange theme showing like that. Yeah, let's make it like that. I could also upload an image into my header. Now, I'm just going to use one of the images that we've already used in the site. So let's click on upload. I'm going to go to the travel images folder, and I'm just going to use this image of Thailand. Let's click on open. And I think that looks pretty nice. Let's click on save. I'm going to go back into change the look again, and let's look at navigation. I'm going to change mine to horizontal because I just prefer that. And we can choose to have cascading or mega menu. Now I'm going to go with cascading. Let's click on save. So speaking of navigation, we could do a little bit of tidying up just here. So let's click on the edit button to open up our navigation pane or our quick launch pane, and I'm going to do a bit of rearranging. I want travel images to be underneath documents, and I want that to be a sublink underneath documents. So let's make it a sublink. I'm going to move pages next to home, and I'm going to move travel forum above notebook and customers above notebook. And I'm actually going to change this display name to show that this is a list. And click on OK. Let's click on save. So now those changes have been reflected, and you can see that we now have a drop down to take us to our travel image library. What else could we do in here? Well, we have our big old edit button over at the side. We can come in here and we can make whatever changes we need. For example, I could add some quick links. So let's click on add links. I'm going to choose to add some links to other parts of my site. Let's go to site pages, and I'm going to link to these two pages just here. Let's click on select. Now I can see those there. Let's remove these two. And then once again, if we edit the quick part, we can change the way that this looks. So how do I want this to display? Well, I actually like that. Let's go with tiles and click on close. I could rearrange some of these quick paths. So maybe I want to move the document library so that it's underneath the news area, like so. And maybe I want to customize how many documents I'm seeing in this activity section. So I'm going to edit this web part, and we're going to say just show 2 documents. And don't forget, we can add new sections by clicking the plus. We've got some sections in here and also some templates. So if I wanted to add something like this, 2-column vertical, I could. And then I can upload some images. So again, I'm just going to upload some of these images just here. Let's showcase a couple of our trips. add that image in. And again, let's browse images, upload, and let's showcase this trip as well. And as we've already seen, we can do things like add a text overlay. So I could add this and say, explore California. And then let's do the same for this one. Let's add a text overlay. This is enchanting England. So I've just made a few changes there. Don't forget to republish the page when you're done, and you can see what that looks like. Now, I'm not saying that that looks the greatest. I probably want to rearrange some of these items and make this look a little bit neater, but you get the idea. Those are some of the changes that you could make. Have a play around and really start to get some knowledge about how to add sections, web parts, and make various changes. That's it for this exercise. I will see you in the next section. A huge congratulations everybody for making it all the way to the end of this course on SharePoint Online. You are well on your way to becoming a SharePoint guru. On behalf of myself and everybody at Simon Says It, I hope you found this course useful, informative, and you've learned some skills that you can put into practice immediately. And when you think about how far we've come from where we started at the beginning of this course, I think you'll agree that it's been beneficial. We've covered so much, from document libraries to lists, site design, and Microsoft 365 integration. We explored navigation, customization, workflows, and permissions, and so much more that I have on the slide just here. The only thing that's left for you to do now is practice, practice, practice. The more you use SharePoint Online, the more little skills and quick tips you'll pick up. You'll also probably find yourself coming across some stumbling blocks along the way, and it's when we encounter these small problems that we learn the most. So stick with it, keep going, and you'll be well on your way to becoming a SharePoint Online expert. I hope you've enjoyed running through this training course as much as I've enjoyed hosting it for you. All that's left now is for me to say my goodbyes, wish you luck, and I hope to see you again on another one of our courses. My name is Deb. Bye for now.